Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and dedicated advocates for climate action. A very warm welcome to each of you as we are back. It's an honor to stand before you as your MC for this remarkable gathering. In collaboration with the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku, Climate Governance Malaysia proudly hosts Malaysian Support for COP29, a virtual forum bringing together thought leaders, innovators, and experts dedicated to advancing impactful climate solutions. This two-week program reflects the Malaysia Pavilion's daily themes, delving into sustainability and reinforcing Malaysia's commitment to a resilient and sustainable future. Today's theme is Systemic Shift, Capitalizing Green Finance and Carbon Market Potential in Malaysia. This cluster's strategic narrative exhibits our nation's commitment and efforts in facilitating and unlocking financing opportunities required to accelerate Malaysia's energy transition journey, while also building long-term climate resilience and maturing its climate financing ecosystem. Addressing these areas will be crucial in bridging funding gaps and unlocking our full potential, propelling Malaysia and its ASEAN region toward our bold net zero aspirations. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Theseira, Director of Climate Governance Malaysia, to share his insights on COP29, along with Dato Seri Johan Raslan, Council Member of Climate Governance Malaysia. Dr. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shan, and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. Once again, it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you at the opening of the Malaysian Day, which of course is several hours ahead of the opening of the day in Baku. This morning, we are very privileged to have with us, of course, Dato Sri Raslan, whom I will call Raslan. I will call Johan. With us to talk a little bit about the theme for today, which is the systemic shift, capitalizing green finance, carbon markets potential in Malaysia. But as usual before that, let me look a little bit at the news coming out of Baku from Third World Network in terms of their updates. Now, there's not been a specific update on the weekend session, which of course runs through Saturday. And part of the reason for that might be the fact that it's customary midway through the 2 weeks of the COP to have a stock take on where the agenda items are and on which agenda items parties have made progress on and which ones they might need perhaps to dedicate more negotiating slots to address. But what I would like to use this short period of time for is to actually, first of all, highlight some of the areas that have come to the fore in terms of some of the negotiating obstacles, as it were. And then also, secondly, talk a little bit about the unity of the various groups. Now, what we saw was that at the beginning of the COP, the very first day, we ended up with an agenda fight. It's not uncommon, but then again, it's not something that you like to begin a COP with. And basically, the first day up to 8 p.m. Was spent basically renegotiating the agenda and finally adopting the agenda at a late hour of 8 p.m. on the first day, meaning that essentially, we lost 1 day of negotiations. The presidency then, kind of responded by launching a couple of initiatives to immediately adopt some articles, some decisions. Particularly the decision on Article 6, which once again paved the way for further discussions on Article 6.2 and 6.4, which we know in terms of international cooperation are very, very important to set up the global carbon trading system. Of course, this is known as the Finance COP, and in the area of finance, the lines have been historically drawn between the developed countries that are obligated to provide support and the developing countries. And as usual, the idea of the new quantified global goal is something that both developed and developing countries look at very, very closely. Of course, the developing countries are adamant that it should be based on the convention, on the principles of the convention, on equity, on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. the fact that the 100 billion that was pledged in Copenhagen was possibly only fulfilled in the last 2 years, is a major contention. The continuous efforts by developed countries to keep adding other sources of financing to the pot of what's normally known as climate finance, that it has to be new, that it has to be additional, that it cannot be part of foreign direct investment. All of these things cannot be non-concessional loans, cannot be loans at market rates. All of these things continue to be battles that are fought between the developed and developing country delegations, even as we recognize that the bill, that the invoice that presented to us by nature has exceeded $200 billion of climate-related damage a year. And so this figure that's being proposed, 1.3 trillion, is a more equitable figure in terms of the total cost of not just mitigation, but adaptation as well. Of course, the two other topics that we discussed were the global stocktake and the global goal on adaptation. And on the latter, the issue of contention is one that the developed countries wish to ensure that the adaptation that any finance is used for has to be transformational adaptation. Once again, putting preconditions, putting criteria, additional criteria on how countries can use any kind of provision of support. Having said all of that, now what I would like to draw your attention to is the fact that although the group of 77 in China is 130 some odd developing countries divided into almost 10 different subgroups, some of which overlap. Of course, China is a member of the like-minded developing countries. You'll find that India is a member of the basic group as well, together with China and others. And then all of them are in the G77 in China. But in reading the updates from Third World Network, what we do find is that there's a very strong sense of consensus and agreement in the G77 in China. This despite the fact that we have in this group very, very diverse subgroups. We do see groups like the least developed countries, the small island developing states, looking very closely at the urgency, the need for reducing emissions, and so that's fairly normal. But at the same time, we do not hear a lot of rhetoric talking about prolonging the use of fossil fuels, even among the countries that are traditionally known as fossil fuel producers. With that, I'd like to open the floor and have Johan join us in this discussion this morning on the theme, first of all, green finance. As you know, Johan, it's part of the overall finance scheme. But when we look at the theme today, we're talking not just globally in terms of the convention, but what's happening within Malaysia as well. Welcome, Johan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary. Yeah, I must say, as COP progresses, I think your daily COP-servations are essential to actually understanding what's going on. We're from far away, as we are not. Most of us are not sitting in Baku and taking it all in on the spot. And even if you were in Baku, you probably might find it a little bit hard to understand what's going on. So your translating of what's going on to us, I think, is invaluable every morning. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, but bring it down back to finance. There's a few questions perhaps I just want to set you off with, and also bring it down back to Malaysia and ASEAN, where we are. A couple of things, actually. In your view, are there any sectors of the economy that are lagging? Perhaps they are sort of hard to abate sectors, and if so, what can government and stakeholders do to prepare the groundwork, enabling environment and frameworks and methodologies, including human capacity, to facilitate soft landing for these sectors? So sectors, as we all work in sectors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the difficulty in trying to resolve this kind of orbits around the fact that we don't necessarily report our greenhouse gas emissions by sector per se. The groupings that we sort of clump our emissions into fall roughly into energy, industrial processes, and product use, agriculture and forestry, waste management, in clusters like that. But when we begin thinking about sectors, then we begin to start breaking energy up into electricity generation, into perhaps thermal energy when we just need heat, into mobility, because all mobility, whether it's public transport, whether it's rail, etc., even if it's road, all runs on energy and fossil fuels. And the idea now that the Madani administration is beginning to set the stage for affirmative climate action, whatever form it takes, whether it's a carbon tax, whether it's a trading system, carbon trading system, a cap and trade system, that it would be extremely difficult to implement that while there are still significant subsidy levels on some of these fossil fuels. But the idea is really that having cut their teeth, as it were, on the removal of the diesel subsidy, at least for non-commercial purposes, I think they have a much better understanding about some of the pushback, some of the pitfalls, some of the unanticipated effects that might occur when they implement these programs, and be able to prepare in advance. Almost more importantly, it's not just the government. I think the Rakyat has also learned lessons from this, and I think that one of the lessons that they learned is, hey, we can do this. The world didn't end. Malaysia didn't go into hyperinflation. The economy is chugging along. As a matter of fact, what the Rakyat sees is that foreign direct investment in Malaysia, as a consequence of some of these very, very important policy decisions, is actually growing. And so I think it has been a huge learning experience for all parties. I mean, I didn't mention the private sector, but it's right, make up the private sector and then deal with the government. But I think it's been a huge, and I think it has emboldened, encouraged, and perhaps given the Malaysian on the street a bit of confidence in terms of what are the benefits of actually moving in this direction. Greater efficiency, greater value for some of the things, more time on our hands, perhaps cleaner environment, cleaner air, perhaps in a few years, a decrease in climate impacts, all of these things. I hope I got your question. But okay, no, I didn't. It was a second. Okay. Where were some? Okay. There is movement, but unfortunately, the first and last mile, as we saw, it was a theme further back a few days ago. But this continues to be a problem. We've got trains that run every 3 minutes, but the feeder buses that serve them will run every 30 to 40 minutes. That makes no sense whatsoever. Also, the waste management sector, I think, is a sector that's a bit lagging behind. But something that is happening in Malaysia is, I think, and very important, is this understanding that all of the sectors are interlinked. If you begin thinking about things in terms of circular economy, and I think many Malaysians are beginning to see that. When you do so, it does two things. One, it makes it a bit more difficult to find the sectors that are lagging. But on the other hand, it might actually point you in the direction of where things are actually slow, and where they might be able to move more quickly. So yeah, some of the first and last mile transportation and energy issues, as well as the waste sector.
Right. Okay. You mentioned carbon tax. Despite calls by many stakeholders for carbon taxes, in some countries it's happened. Our government still continues to push the carbon market as the preferred mechanism to accelerate transition from to a low carbon economy. But wouldn't programs be either way? The program be distorted if subsidies are not rationalized.
Thanks for the question. The part of the rationale for considering a carbon tax is of course the fact that within our region, Singapore is a working example of how a carbon tax can be implemented, even in a very small landmass. The economy is considerably larger. But in terms of comparability within a region like ASEAN, we have things like our taxonomy. Singapore has a taxonomy. Thailand has a taxonomy. Now ASEAN has a taxonomy. But in trying to harmonize what's going on between ASEAN member states, it would be nice if Singapore, having led the way, if other ASEAN member states might be able to sort of move in alignment, in parallel, not at the same pace, obviously, but with the same understanding of the principles and concepts of these things, so that at some point in the future, the entire ASEAN economy might be able to be more or less integrated into an economy where we can begin to assist and facilitate each other with respect to energy use and emissions reductions. We heard some of that coming out of Baku, as a matter of fact, in the later stages of last week. Some of the panelists on the panels have been talking about the fact that, look, if you generate electricity, but you have no battery storage and you don't use it immediately, it's a wasted generation. And if you generate it with fossil fuels, it's been an emission that has actually been, ineffectual in terms of use. You've basically burnt empty calories and added greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. Now, with the growing interconnections between ASEAN member states and the ability to, in real time, respond to demand and supply, what we will find is we'll make much more efficient use of every single megawatt that's generated, regardless of whether it's generated in Singapore, in Johor, across in Sumatra. With these interconnections, any electricity that's generated within the system can be moved to where it's needed and be used, so that for countries that have these kinds of treaties, these kinds of agreements, at the time when I anticipate perhaps a heat wave in Jakarta or in Aceh or something like that, and we expect that there'll be more draw on electricity and energy there, that we can, instead of them ramping up their emergency quick response generators, which are very inefficient, that we could route some of the more efficiently generated electricity. So all countries have these sort of emergency power plants that they can call up on short notice and get going. And these tend to be the most inefficient ones, with the idea that as an integrated region, we might be able to share and shed some of this load where it's needed. I think already speaks a great deal. Now, it also sends a very strong signal overseas to investors that it's not so much any given ASEAN country that you invest in. You can, with some confidence, invest in the region as a whole and expect low carbon support in terms of services for your whatever it is, whether it's a factory you're investing in, or whether it's support services, businesses, etc.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. That's very that's kind of quite a vision that we have of ASEAN cooperation going to another level, and that'd be wonderful. Now, other people have visions, and unfortunately, not all of them are sort of in alignment with ours. And one of the sort of elephant in the room, the specter at the feast, looming over us, has been one of the leaders of working for climate transition in the United States, looking as though with the recent election might be taking a completely different stance. And we know that when important countries don't like something, not only can they pull out, but they can also sort of wreck what's going on, even if they're not part of it. So what do you think is how do you see this effect? I'm not going to name the man. I don't want to.
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's not use names, but we all know what we're talking about. What do you think is going to be the effect here?
Thank you, Johan. Yes, we have been through one iteration at least of this administration, and in retrospect, looking at it, neither Malaysia nor the world as a whole was impacted to a huge extent. We do see, I mean, of course, this is going to be his second and final term. So he I don't think he's going to walk on glass or tread softly. I think he's going to try to move everything he can, because he knows he can't run again. But we see from the previous iteration that the world and even most of the residents of this great country that he's taken charge of actually are experiencing, like the rest of the world, climate impacts firsthand. The hurricanes, the wildfires, all of these things do impact. I mean, even the increase in the intensity and the frequency of tornadoes. All of these things are being felt by, as it were, his rakyat. And so the impact of climate change is not lost on the man on the street over there. Perhaps some other concerns related to perhaps other social issues or economic issues might have resulted in the vote that we saw, but the outcome of the vote that we saw. But I think globally, when you look at centers such as the EU, for example, where even with the instability there, we know that I think France, called for early elections. Germany now has a bit of a hung parliament have to go back. But even with all of these perturbations in the system, I think we see a sort of inexorable shift in direction to address climate change, and it's not. And I think the realizations have begun to kick in that it's not just climate that has to drive you; it is sustainability that has to drive you. Because what's good for the climate happens to be good for efficiency. And if it's good for efficiency, then it's going to come at lower cost, not just economic cost, but it's going to come at lower environmental cost. It's going to come at lower social cost. And so the world, I think, is beginning to see that climate change is just one facet, one angle, one side of a polygon that includes environmental sustainability, that includes social inclusivity, equity, justice, and the like. So we keep seeing these things being dragged into the climate agreement. We see transformational, just transformation. That's technically something that previously was outside. And so things like that, I think, are more important. I think that the world is not going to change direction. Yes, there may be some foot dragging on some countries. Of course, that country is not the only one. There are some states, even in Asia, there are some states that are not participating whatsoever in the climate negotiations and the climate systems. In fact, in the free economy. But we don't see the world's focus being distracted by some of these things. Johan, you're muted.
Thank you very much for that. That kind of optimistic uncle view is wonderful to hear. So that's great, and that takes care of that issue. That basically, I suppose what you're saying is, there are rational people out there. Let's hope there are, Gary. Okay, then last question, if you like, because we are running out of time time swiftly. Only got 4 more minutes. Okay, as with as you started off by saying the first day was arguing over stuff that was not supposed to be arguing over, and with every COP there are naysayers, especially if you read the mainstream media, a lot of naysayers about the whole COP thing. Is the COP framework, in your view, still fit for purpose?
That's a $1 billion question. Short answer, I don't think at present we have anything that can replace it. We have the General Assembly and the like. Within the General Assembly, we have problems because some countries have veto power. Security Council, for example, some countries simply have veto power and they can exercise it at any point. There are not many institutional frameworks where there's a sense of equity that sort of prevents sort of wholesale hijacking of the process by any one party. The UNFCCC does not work on the basis of votes, because we believe it's really important to try to get as close as possible to a unanimity, and the closest we can get actually is a consensus. And if enough countries believe that a particular direction is the direction that the world needs to move in, then in all likelihood that's going to happen. So it's not a perfect process, by the way. I mean, even within the COP administration, there have been problems. I personally, after having worked with a group of 77 presidencies, one year I recall being perfectly mortified to walk by one of the conference rooms, with the chair of G77 in China, only to hear a recording of the supposedly closed G77 in China meeting being played in that empty room. And we were aghast because, here we put our hands, we put our faith in the hands of a secretariat who's supposed to understand which meetings are closed and cannot be, cannot have any information made public. And yet here was a recording of a supposedly closed meeting being played openly in an empty room. It wasn't even supposed to be recorded in the first place. But yeah, despite problems like that, despite the fact that, at the start of the COP, some countries can decide they do want to engage in an agenda fight. If they do want to drag their feet when it comes time at the closing plenary to gavel, as the US did in Paris, for example. We really cannot work our way through this without looking at it at the bigger picture outcome. I think, yes, we should always be making improvements. We should be strengthening the governance within the COP, even as we strengthen governance everywhere else, in our personal lives, in our corporates, in our governments. And I think that all of these things actually bode well. But to come back to your question, there really isn't an alternative. And perhaps we can look at as things become more integrated, combining some of the international meetings, for example, the biodiversity COP, for example, with the climate COP. Perhaps some of the other agreements on air quality and things like that. Because then we might be able to economize and not travel so much, not have so much emissions, move more things online, for example, bring the intergovernmental on climate change, the IPCC and other groups into closer contact, so that the information that they generate can actually be implemented effectively and the like. So I think until we have a better structure, mechanism, a framework, institution for this, the UNFCCC is the best we can do, and it has been effective if you look at some aspects of emissions reduction.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Gary Theseira, thank you so much for that. Your observations, every morning you come. So basically, guys, all you have to do is in the morning, you listen to Gary. He wraps up the next day. Then we have our program. Then you actually, you can tune into Baku. Then you can sleep for half an hour. Then you can come back to Gary again. And but without Gary, I think I wouldn't know how to make sense of what actually is going on in
like
Baku.
Johan is doing now.
Yes,
losing sleep
I got to
because
thank.
of
That's right. I got to thank you very much, Gary. Really appreciate that. I think with that, I will move to the introduction of today proper, if that's okay with you and with everybody here. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, Johan.
So, Sir, if you allow me, I'll just take over from here and introduce the day. So with that, good morning, distinguished guests and participants. It's a massive honor for me to welcome you to today's session with its theme pivotal to Malaysia's journey to sustainability: systemic shift, capitalizing green finance and carbon market potential in Malaysia. Whether it's your first day, or you've been part of the discussion throughout, we appreciate your engagement and commitment, and let you know, I think this is fairly unique thing that we are doing here compared to other countries, trying to make sense of what's happening in Baku in COP for our Malaysian audience. And as usual, all our sessions are recorded and will be available on our official Climate Governance Malaysia YouTube channel for those of you who wish to revisit these insights, and that'll be available soon. Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, as we all know, is incredibly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Climate-related disasters are increasingly frequent and severe, and you just have to read the local newspapers to realize this. It inflicts economic and social losses across the region, in the big picture macro, but also down to each of us in our daily lives. And I don't need to tell you that it's been made clear throughout the event that urgent climate mitigation and resilience efforts are needed for us and our future generations just to survive. Achieving Malaysia's climate goals, however, demands a substantial increase in investment. The funding gap is huge, and while sustainable finance is growing, it remains only a small fraction of traditional markets, whether we like it or not. In Malaysia, progress is being made in green finance. We've had the Green Technology Financing Scheme, or GTFS. It's been pivotal in mobilizing private sector participation in green investments. The latest iteration, GTFS 4.0, has brought together 49 banks and financial institutions to fund projects across renewable energy, sustainable building, transportation, waste management, water, and green manufacturing sectors. GTFS acts as an important enabler, helping bridge financing gaps and empowering emerging green businesses across Malaysia. In addition, Malaysia's Sustainable and Responsible Investment SRI Sukuk framework leverages the strength of our nation's Islamic finance industry. So Islamic finance has got behind this in a big way. The green sukuks provide an innovative financing avenue for eco-friendly projects, blending financial innovation with sustainability and cultural principles. Green sukuks have been issued for the construction of multiple solar power plants, including one in Kudat in Sabah. Carbon markets, a lot of potential there, and alongside green finance, Malaysia is advancing efforts in the carbon market space to support emissions reduction. The Bursa Carbon Exchange is a new kid on the block, Malaysia's domestic voluntary carbon market, and it provides industries with a platform to trade carbon credits, creating financial incentives for companies to reduce their carbon footprint. This afternoon, the Malaysian Carbon Market Association will participate in the signing of a memorandum of collaboration at the Malaysia Pavilion in Baku, which is wonderful, joining with other ASEAN carbon market associations. This regional agreement represents a unified commitment to accelerate emissions reduction, attract green investment, and enhance regional collaboration in climate action. And it kind of puts into real life that move, that maybe small, but that move that Gary was talking about of ASEAN harmonization, ASEAN working together. So please be sure to tune into the Malaysian Pavilion live stream via their website to witness this important step. Financial markets for a sustainable future. While Malaysia has made significant strides in the transition to a climate-resilient and low-carbon economy, there's still a lot to be done. Sustainable debt and equity markets in Malaysia have shown impressive growth, yet they still represent a small share of overall markets. This highlights the vast untapped potential within sustainable finance. Expanding these markets and embedding sustainability into the core decision-making processes of financial institutions will be key to driving large-scale investments in climate resilience. By fostering a systemic shift in finance, Malaysia not only strengthens its economic resilience, but also enhances its position as a leader in the global transition toward a low-carbon sustainable economy. I turn now to the agenda for today, and it's this morning is quite packed, and as usual with our CGM efforts, and I make no apology for this. You have to, we pack it all in for you. We don't want to waste your time. After my opening, we will have a keynote on catalyzing green finance institutional investment for Malaysia's sustainable energy, and that's by Dinagaran Chandra, head of ESG investments at PNB. And PNB is a huge investment institution, and we welcome the fact that they are taking a lead on this. After that, at 9:30, we have the keynote for today, which is investment opportunities in climate transition. That will be delivered by Henry Soediarko, Senior Portfolio Manager and Head of Research for the award-winning Climate Impact Asia Fund. Following that, we got two panel discussions. And the first one is on strengthening climate ambitions, ASEAN support, and that will be moderated by Ashraf Gomma, Group Chief Shariah and Sustainability Officer at MBSB Bank, and will include Cintia Nunes, General Manager, Head of Asia at the Mills Fabrica, Henry Wang, Advisory Board Member, University of London's SOAS China Institute, and the other Henry again, Henry Soediarko from Climate Impact Asia Fund. So that panel, and that panel is at 9:50. That'll be followed at 10:50 by the ICDM, the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia panel, entitled "The Role of the Board: What is Needed for Impactful Transition Finance." And I'm very excited to see that almost everybody on the panel is somebody, a friend of mine. I'm very excited, looking forward to that. That will be moderated by Jackie Ma, Executive Vice President of ICDM, and will include Ho Yit Mei, Independent Director of CIMB Group and a former partner in Ernst & Young, Regina Rahim, Advisor of the Institutional Investors Council of Malaysia, another friend of mine, and Sarah, who is not yet a friend of mine, but I hope will be, Sarah Fairhurst, Independent Director of various public listed companies from the UK. Looking forward to hearing them. And we will end our program at 11:50. So, the way, as Gary mentioned, the way the world is, we will have our program. Baku will then open. You'll get into that, and then you have about 2 hours sleep, and then get up again. And Gary will tell you what actually happened. He'll interpret for you what actually happened yesterday for us all. I'm looking forward actually to. I can't wait for Gary's COP-servations tomorrow morning. With that, the time has arrived for me to hand over to this. So we got this incredible lineup. We have the representatives from PNB, Climate Impact Asia Fund, ICDM, etc., who will explore how Malaysia can bridge financial gaps. Thank you again for joining us. Look forward to a productive exchange of ideas and insights, and maybe even some arguments on the panel. And I like panels that argue, to be honest. Looking forward to that. And please stay connected through our Climate Governance Malaysia newsletter and LinkedIn for latest climate updates. I'm going to hand you back now. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Over to Shen. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for your insights, Dr. Seri, Johan. Well, as a quick reminder, each day begins with a 30-minute breakfast chat hosted by Dr. Gary and his guest speakers, where they delve into his daily observations and reflections. These sessions will be recorded on our CGM channel and periodically streamed by the Malaysia Pavilion during session transitions. We shall now continue with our first keynote of the day, titled Catalyzing Green Finance Institutional Investment for Malaysia's Sustainable Future by Mr. Dinagaran Chandra, Head of ESG Investments for Permodalan Nasional Berhad PNB. Over to you, Dinagaran. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I believe my slides should be up for everyone to see. Thank you. Thank you for inviting PNB to share our views and perspectives about climate action. We believe as we approach a carbon-constrained future, climate considerations are fast shaping investor actions in many ways. Can we move on to the next slide? So we have seen an increasing number of climate regulations and incentives that are being deployed by various governments across the world to reduce carbon emissions and also to meet their nationally determined contributions. And this is having a massive spillover effect on the business landscape as companies need to assess the resiliency of their business models and also unlock new opportunities that are driven by these climate ambitions by many governments across the world. Therefore, we believe as institutional investors, we need to start assessing climate considerations when we deploy investments. And as you can see in this slide, a large proportion of asset owners and asset managers already have long-term climate targets that are supported by interim decarbonization targets as well. Therefore, it is very natural for many of them to start assessing the implication of carbon emissions alongside traditional financial returns. Next slide. We believe the establishment of the voluntary carbon market in Malaysia is a great first step towards establishing a market-based mechanism to drive decarbonization solutions. Essentially, the voluntary carbon market provides a robust mechanism to facilitate the flow of financing towards climate-friendly projects that otherwise will be difficult to get funding. This includes projects such as reforestations, nature-based solutions, carbon capture, which are very expensive to deploy. But with the help of carbon market solutions, we can see a greater flow of financing that will improve the economic viability of these projects to be implemented at scale. As Malaysia has the first Shariah-compliant carbon exchange, the BCX or the Bursa Carbon Exchange has become an important platform for companies to trade carbon credits as well as renewable energy certificates. However, we also believe that we need to grow the broader ecosystem to create a robust pipeline of decarbonization projects in Malaysia to help Malaysia to achieve its own net zero ambition by 2050. But at the same time, the carbon market can also create a vibrant net zero economy that can unlock job creation potential, business opportunities for the broader Malaysian public. We also believe that the carbon market can play an important role to really activate funding towards nature-based solutions that can help to improve the health of our ecosystems, reduce nature loss, and also to maintain the biodiversity intact in this nature-rich country. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, at the same time, we also believe that participation in the voluntary carbon market can help to incentivize the right carbon behavior. According to a report published by Trove Research, companies that offset using high-quality carbon credits are actually decarbonizing twice the rate versus companies that do not use carbon credits. We believe that as companies offset their emissions, they're actually pricing their own carbon emissions today. Therefore, this affects the economic assessment of their own decarbonization projects and making it more viable over time. At the same time, the capital that is raised, it's also being deployed towards projects that would either remove or reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere. This then creates a win-win scenario for both companies as well as the planet. At the same time, we also believe that it's important to enhance the integrity of the carbon market to ensure that projects have robust measures to ensure additionality, permanence, non-leakage, and also other important parameters that are required to make sure that carbon markets are not just high functioning, but have robust mechanisms to ensure high integrity offsetting. Next slide. During the recent budget announcement, the government of Malaysia also announced that they're exploring the introduction of carbon tax covering key sectors such as iron, steel, and energy. And this will be a huge game changer, we believe, in Malaysia. We feel a compliance carbon market alongside a voluntary carbon market can really accelerate the decarbonization journey in Malaysia. As Malaysia is essentially a trading nation, it is important that we reduce our embodied carbons in our goods and services to ensure that we remain competitive in the global business landscape. We also believe that carbon emissions will become an important denominator of trade alongside cost and quality. This is especially when many countries and economic blocs start implementing carbon border tariffs, or large corporates start looking at carbon emissions within their own supply chain and also start excluding companies based on their embodied carbon emissions in the goods and services. So it's important that we also position Malaysia in this new carbon constrained economy. Next slide. The Institutional Investors Council Malaysia, or IIC, which comprises the government-linked investment companies and other asset managers, can actually play an important role in influencing corporate behavior. Given our collective asset under management of over 2.3 trillion, we recognize we have a unique role to play in investment stewardship. Our activities and as shareholders are also guided by the Malaysian Code for Institutional Investors, which also recognizes the importance of incorporating sustainability considerations in the investment value chain process, as well as ensuring transparency and accountability in our shareholder actions. Moving on to the next slide. So at PNB, we recognize the impact that we can generate through our actions. As a long-standing government-linked investment company, we actually manage assets under management more than 340 billion. And when we aggregate the investments that we have in Bursa Malaysia, we actually own about 10% of the Bursa Malaysia market cap. Therefore, we feel that we have a very strong role to play in influencing corporate behavior in Malaysia. Therefore, sustainability is very much integrated into our fiduciary duty and also our broader stewardship framework. Next slide. So we believe that focusing on ESG creates long-term value for the organization. As a significant shareholder in several large listed companies, we also believe that ESG factors can enhance shareholder value and also help to manage evolving risk. And our sustainability approach is predicated on 5 core principles, which I will not cover in great detail, but the important one to flag out here will be progress over perfection. We believe that many of the sustainability standards and frameworks are also evolving, and they are evolving quite rapidly. At the same time, we cannot wait for the standards and frameworks to be perfect in order to drive action. We believe that when we engage companies, we focus on them making incremental progress and also making sure that their net zero plans and ambitions are supported by credible initiatives that will result in near-term benefits, not just for the organization, but also for the planet. Next slide. So we announced our sustainability framework in April 2022, and we have 10 ESG commitments that cut across the environment, social, and governance pillars. Focusing on the environmental component, we have 3 environmental ambitions. The first, we believe that we want to achieve net zero enterprise by 2025. As an organization, our emission footprint is relatively low, and this is mostly from our branch office operations and also the assets that we own. And we also believe that we need to walk the talk when we engage our companies. Hence why we have a much more ambitious net zero commitment for our enterprise operations. At the same time, we also want to achieve net zero portfolio by 2050, and this is where 99% of our emissions are concentrated in. At the same time, we also want to make sure that by 2030, we achieve at least 10 billion of investments in new green and transition assets. Given that net zero 2050, it's a long journey for the organization, we also define interim climate targets to guide our near-term actions. This includes ensuring that by 2030, 70% of our portfolio emissions are covered by credible net zero targets. At the same time, we also want to reduce our emission intensity by 30% by 2030. We also made a commitment that we will not invest in any greenfield thermal coal, in particular coal power generation and thermal coal mining. We also have a supplementary target to by adopting a no deforestation, no development on peat, and no exploitation in all our investment approach. Next slide. So PNB's finance emissions are mainly concentrated in a few key sectors. This includes power, plantation, oil and gas, and real estate, which is also aligned with Malaysia's own emission inventory. And this is not surprising given that PNB has an 80% investment that is concentrated in the domestic scene. So it is also in our best interest to support Malaysia's own decarbonization journey to ensure that PNB can meet our own net zero ambition. We have integrated carbon assessments in all our deal flows to ensure that we stay on the path towards decarbonizing our investment portfolio. We also see carbon emissions as a proxy to climate risk. We measure and manage our carbon emissions not only to meet our net zero commitments, but we also believe that the faster that we decarbonize, the more resilient our investment portfolio will become over time. Next slide. Since we have announced our commitments, we have made significant strides in our ESG commitments. This includes us measuring and disclosing our finance emissions transparently for 2 years running. We also set our interim climate targets, which I've explained earlier. We also periodically send climate letters to all our strategic and core companies and also our top emitters to encourage them to drive decarbonization within their own operations and value chain. We have developed our own coal risk screening tool to ensure that we avoid investing into coal power generation and coal thermal mining, which we believe will become stranded in the future as we approach a low carbon economy. We also have developed our own internal green taxonomy to guide investments into green and transition assets. Next slide. Moving on, we also would like to expand our climate focus to ensure that we continue to make progress in several key areas. This year, we are focused on automating our carbon emissions measurement and management to ensure that we track our carbon emissions almost on a real-time basis. And this is essentially going to feed into our investment decision-making a lot closer. At the same time, we also want to scale up our climate engagements with our strategic companies as well as top emitters to make sure that they remain on track towards meeting their own net zero goals. We are also looking at carbon pricing to really price the externalities that can affect our investments in a great way. We believe that as many countries start looking at carbon pricing as means to reduce their own carbon emissions, we believe that certain sectors and industries will face heightened risk because of their carbon emissions. So therefore, it's important that we start baking in what will be the right carbon price within our own expected rate of return when we invest in companies. At the same time, we also believe that we cannot solve the climate crisis without looking at the drivers of nature loss. Hence, we are looking to develop our nature and biodiversity policy, where we will outline transparently what our shareholder expectations are on companies that are highly exposed to nature-related losses. Moving on to the next slide. We have a specific commitment where we want to ensure that 70% of our portfolio emissions are covered by credible net zero target. In doing so, what we have done is we have developed our own net zero credibility assessment that is modeled on emerging standards such as Climate Action 100 and Net Zero Investment Framework, where we assess the credibility of ambition and plans disclosed by companies, and we categorize them into several alignment buckets. This ensures that when we engage companies, we are evaluating them based on an objective assessment parameter, and we would like to see companies progress over time to make sure that by 2030, all of them are net zero aligned. And moving on to the next slide. As a shareholder, we believe that we have multiple levers that we can activate to really drive climate action within our investments. This includes the voting guideline. And in 2023, we enhanced our proxy voting guideline to really heighten or scale up our ESG expectations for our investee companies. This includes Starting 1st January 2025, we expect all our investee companies to have a net zero ambition. And 1 year later, we expect our investee companies to publish a clearly defined and actionable net zero strategy. If companies fail to do so, we may vote against the chairperson of the board or the chairperson of the board sustainability committee. So we believe that as shareholders, if we are transparent about our ESG expectations, it provides clarity to companies on what are the necessary actions that they need to focus on within the short term. At the same time, we also send shareholder letters to companies, really encouraging them to really deepen their net zero ESG ambitions and plans, and so transparently disclose their progress, because all providers of capital, not just investors, and it also includes lenders, are demanding greater action from companies. Moving on to the next slide. And in addition to net zero expectations, we also have integrated other sustainability considerations and expectations for our investee companies. This includes, we expect our investee companies to have at least 30% female in the boardroom. We also have defined expectations on what needs to be done from a climate, labor, and biodiversity perspective. And all this will shape our voting decisions, both domestic and also in the international equities moving forward. Next slide. Yes. And there are many reasons why PNB would like to really scale up our ambitions and plans in making sure that we have a ESG resilient investment portfolio. This ultimately ties back to our ability to make sustainable returns. We serve about 13 million Malaysians across different walks of life and generations. We believe that by incorporating ESG within our investment approaches, it actually improves the resiliency of our investment decisions over time. And therefore, it makes sure that we are able to meet our fiduciary duty, which is to deliver sustainable returns to all our unit trust holders. Next slide. Yes. So we believe that ESG ultimately can unlock long-term value creation for our investments. According to the World Economic Forum, 6 out of 10 global risks are environmental and societal risks that can really affect the business landscape. This includes the threat of climate events, loss of social cohesion, and biodiversity decline, among others. So therefore, it is our duty to ensure that we capture and factor in all material ESG risk in our risk-adjusted returns when we deploy investments. At the same time, we also believe that we have a moral responsibility to steward our investments towards a low-carbon future and to avoid the catastrophic effects of climate change. I will end today with a quote from Barack Obama. He said, "We are the first generation to truly feel the effects of climate change and also the last generation that can do something about it. Therefore, we need a whole of society approach to make sure that we remain on track towards a net zero future." Thank you.
Well said, Mr. Dinagaran. Thank you very much for your insights. Let us now welcome our second keynote from Henry Soediarko, who is a Senior Portfolio Manager and Head of Research for the award-winning Climate Impact Asia Fund. He will be presenting his keynote titled Investment Opportunities in Climate Transition. The floor is yours, Henry. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, all. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to, especially to Climate Governance Malaysia, and the people who are involved within First Estate and Mill Trust. To start with, there's a few incidents within the our nature that has happened recently, right? I mean, we know the Mount Fuji apparently has been snowless for the longest time until it started to happen last week. There's also a big floods in the Georgetown in Penang that never really happened before. Sorry. Also, there's a sinkhole in KL that apparently happened around 10 years ago, in 2014. Similar thing actually happened in August in 2024. Now, we might want to wonder whether this is caused by the unstable infrastructure, or was it really coming from tectonic shift originated from the large deviations in climate? This is obviously a picture in the future that we don't want to see, right? We've got rising global temperature, deforestation, and then crisis in the North or South Pole. What we know about climate change has always have been there's a risk. It is a risk. Warmer global temperature, more frequent natural disaster, right? Is the Earth that we know is still a livable Earth? But it also makes me wonder, do we find alternatives? Do we need to find alternatives like in SpaceX and Mars in Elon Musk? But is it really a risk? Or do we also find opportunities on this? The World Wildlife Foundation has set out staggering impact on what will happen to our Earth should global average temperature increase by 2 degrees instead of 1.5 degrees, in the reduction of water availability, changes in the amount of people that will be exposed to extreme heat, Arctic sea ice, sea level rise, oceans, coral bleachings, which means at some point there won't be any much seafood left for us, and changes in the compositions of the animal species. How does global government respond to this? There's a Paris Agreement signed in 2015, designed to collectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The goal is really to keep maximum of 2 degrees above, right? And to really limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. 2030, we want to reduce by 50% of greenhouse gas emission and another 50% by 2050. So there's a lot of work to be done. The Malaysian government has set out a 45 degrees reduction in economy wide carbon intensity by 2030, that is followed by a net zero in 2050. The government has also set up a National Climate Change Policy 2.0 and NETR, National Energy Transition Roadmap, that highlight that what are the steps needed to be taken to ensure Malaysia reach net zero by 2050. The National Energy Roadmap identifies energy efficiency, or EE, that includes energy savings plan, renewable energy, that includes reduction of coal-fired power plants, and increasing renewable energy capacity in the country. Within the green mobility, the government plans to increase share of public transport up to 50% and up to 30% of the EV four-wheelers. The new energy transition roadmap highlighted a few potential investment opportunities in the energy efficiencies, renewable energy, green mobility for investors and markets to consider. These are the real investment opportunities within a transition to net zero. So we're not merely talking about what are the challenges that we're going to face, but actually there is investment opportunities within this space for all of us to reach net zero. The impact is self-evident. The country will be dependent on lesser import, although there will be, unfortunately, cost inflation. This requires a hefty investment that is also an opportunity to create jobs, that is positive for the economic development, but also reducing the emission per capita by half in 2030. Now, if we do go over the facts, this is probably one of the most important graph that we can explain, that we actually discussed today. So in order to reach net zero, we need a massive capacity in the carbon removal capacity and carbon reduction solutions as well. if you look at the golden charts, right, these are the emissions required to reach the 1.5 degrees pathway. So if you see, we all have to reduce from around 40 tons of emissions to around 23 by 2030. And then hopefully it will taper down to all the way to around 10 or 5 trillion 5 gigatons of emissions by 2050. Now, we also need a negative emissions by hopefully to be developed by 2030 or late 2020s. So just to sum up again, just to remind us everything again, right? So in order to achieve net zero, the world needs a large quantity of carbon removal and a large quantity of solution to reduce carbon emissions. Now, our previous speaker from PNB has discussed, Mr. Dinagaran has mentioned about the importance of carbon credits, right? So we're going to talk about this briefly. There are 3 types of carbon credits. One is carbon removal from projects that remove carbon from a diverse set of solutions, including reforestations, to engineering solutions such as direct air capture and storage. According to Carbon Direct, there's only around 3% of the total carbon supplies in the carbon markets are classified as removals. Carbon avoidance are probably the most common. They basically comes from a lot of reductions in deforestation when people trying to avoid deforestations, which essentially help to release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, there are around 75% of the available certified credits on carbon avoidance. Carbon reductions, on the other hand, is probably the most interesting thing that for us and how we can develop technologies that typically comes from improving fuel efficiencies or waste recycling. This is around approximately 22% of the certified credits. Now, the most interesting part is that I keep it in bold is that reduction credits are measured and quantified against baseline emissions of the existing technology or process. So what do we see in the area of renewable energy and batteries? Now, the falling price of renewable energy is obviously a negative for the corporations, but certainly is a positive to increase adoption of renewable energy. Battery prices around the world has fallen as well, creating an opportunity for electric vehicles to record higher margin or keeping prices low when we want to increase market share. One of the reasons on the falling prices that capacity expansions happen at the best, both for solar and batteries. The capacity expansion sped up in the recent years compared to the pre-2010 era. Energy generations for solar has expanded dramatically as well. So is the storage capacity for battery. Both actually highlights the technological innovation that took place in the recent years that increased the functionality and also give us all of hope that there are opportunities in the climate transitions to reach net zero by 2050. If we look at the charts that we see, these are the source of greenhouse gas emission in Malaysia up to 2020. Most of them come from the electricity and heat. Some of them come from the land use change and forestry, basically deforestation. 61 million metric ton comes from transport, and around 33 comes from manufacturing and constructions. Now, interestingly, you see aviation and shipping contributed up to 3.2 million metric tons of emissions. So these are the sectors that cause the problem, but also these are the sectors that we should start to decarbonize. Thankfully, the Malaysian government has come up with a new industrial plan. Essentially, they identified that there are opportunities in the growth areas, including renewable energy, circular economy, which is basically recycling and carbon captures and utility storage, and electric vehicles. So if we look at the high emission business activities that is slated on the left, it comes from renewable energy that would actually bring everything into the low carbon emissions by moving to the right side. If we tilt it vertically, now we can see it clearer that renewable energy, carbon storage, and energy storage, energy efficiency, electrification of process, utilization of sustainable raw materials, that means recycling, including metals, waste recycling, and carbon captures, actually coincides with the following sectors: renewable energy, water treatment, environmental service, low carbon transport, energy management system, and green consumer staples. So if we look at this, there are, so just to give you a brief outlook about the Climate Impact Asia Fund, there is a collaboration between First Estate Capital Management, Mill Trust International, and WWF. It is a long-only, high-conviction fund investing in the leading Asia-Pacific listed companies in the decarbonization business. We co-developed the climate universe in 2019 and 2020 between Mill Trust International and WWF. How does WWF play a role with us? A significant share of their revenues will be donated to WWF Singapore biodiversity and conservation programs in Singapore and later on in Asia. One of the things that set us apart to a lot of other funds is that we develop proprietary dark green screen together with WWF that says we only invest in listed Asia Pacific equities with market cap higher than $200 million. And more importantly, 50% of the revenue must come from one of these sectors on the right side, from renewable energy, energy management service, low carbon transport, water treatment, environmental service, and green consumer staples, and their value chain as well. So not only the end names, not only the BYD and Li Auto of the world, but also companies that are part of their value chain. We have won a number of awards in the last 4 years. We've won awards from Environmental Finance, from Wealth for Good Awards, also lately from Asian investors. Now, what really set us apart, if we look at the top 5 holdings between our fund, the Climate Impact Asia Fund, and the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, and the other 2 funds that has low carbons as the fund name, most of them have high overlap on the names. If you look at the low carbon Asia Pacific ETF and MSCI Asia Pacific, most of them are the same. TSMC, Samsung, Electronics, Tencent, Toyota, Alibaba. Now, one would wonder how many of these top 5 holdings are actually contributing to decarbonization. If you look at the low carbon Asia Pacific transitions, they have banks, they have Cochlear, they have BHP, a mining company, and insurance company. Now, what do we have? We have electric vehicles, XPeng and BYD as of September 2024. We have HG Hyundai Electric, which is the power transformer maker in South Korea. CS Wind, which is the wind tower maker also based in South Korea. And then we have Weiseng, a Chinese company that makes smart power meters with clients all over the world. Now, what we know is that decarbonization as a key drivers for the other funds are actually below 50%, right? So they're not yet a significant drivers. For us, it's very, very important to note and to stay within our integrity that everything that we invest on can be attributed to a green or decarbonization business. So this, I'm not going to discuss this, but this is briefly mentioned about what the companies are doing. So we're trying, essentially what we're doing is pretty much in line with what the Malaysian government have highlighted earlier, that there are opportunities in the new green growth areas, in electric vehicles, in circular economy, in renewable energy, and actually others. Because we also look at the companies within the value chain that actually contributed to the manufacturing of electric vehicles, of batteries, and others. Now, is climate investing profitable? It shows that investing in BYD, for example, has returned 660% in the last 5 years, while investing in Toyota, the equivalent or the much larger company when it comes to four-wheel mobility, has returned 73%. So, investing in BYD has actually outperformed Toyota by a large margin in the last 5 years. Also, investing in Delta Electronics, that is listed in Thailand, that is involved with EV charging mechanism, electric vehicle spare parts, is much more profitable compared to investing in the parent company, Delta, that is listed in Taiwan, that is much larger market capitalization, but the focus is much more in the uninterrupted power supply components. Initially, we talked about carbon credits and the impact, right? So if we look at our portfolio impact tracking, you see everything else besides the one in the square box, that they are actually, you can also find them in the other ESG or climate funds. What you probably don't really see in the others is the one in the square box. We actually can quantify with the help of our third-party vendor called Net Purpose to find out how much carbon emissions have investment in the fund actually helped to reduce, right? Not all of these are qualified for carbon credits, but certainly around 20 or 25% will be. And that means another stream of revenue for the companies that we own. Now, bear in mind, Tesla actually made $1 billion, or around 40% of their earnings last year, from selling carbon credits. Not many of the Asian companies that we invested have actually done that. So this is also a new area for growth. So to sum up, we actually prefer companies whose revenue key driver actually comes from green business activity, rather than the other companies, the larger companies typically, that actually have a key drivers of green business in the operating expenses. We also want to invest in companies that are the beneficiary of decarbonization. And we try to see whether Asia versus global, where is the global supply chain? We want to de-risk the business. We want to have a lower risk in the advertisement and promotions. We also think a lot of companies in Asia have lower broker coverage, therefore much more upside potential. We are very proud of our partnership with WWF because it ensures that everything is clean and green, and also a participation into the nature conservation projects. And we think there are tons of opportunities that will come from capital appreciation and carbon credits. Now, is it profit-driven purpose or purpose-driven profit? We think profit with impact certainly is possible. We're currently looking forward to launch our fund in Malaysia, a collaboration between MIDF, MBSB, Mill Trust, First State, and WWF. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Henry, for your keynote speech. We're especially fortunate to have you continue sharing your insights as a distinguished panelist in the discussion that follows. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, can I encourage you to take a moment to complete our survey? Your feedback is invaluable in helping us to enhance our experience at future events. We are now privileged to have Henry, fresh from delivering his inspiring keynote, to join us as a panelist for our first discussion of the day, titled Strengthening Climate Ambition, ASEAN's Support. Curated by the Climate Impact Asia Fund, this session will be moderated by Ashraf Gomma Ali, Group Chief Shariah and Sustainability Officer at MBSB Bank, and features a distinguished panel of speakers. Cintia Nunes, General Manager and Head of Asia at the Mills Fabrica. Henry Wang, Advisory Board Member, University of London SOAS China Institute SCI. Joined by Henry Soediarko, Managing Director of Climate Impact Asia Fund. Please join me in warmly welcoming Ashraf and our esteemed panelists as they lead us through this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you under the auspices of the COP29 and the Malaysian Pavilion, and to speak about how ASEAN can strengthen its climate ambition to move forward in this, nation, in this kind of global mission that we have to fulfill our responsibility to the environment and to the global community. So I just want to begin by introducing our distinguished panel that we have here. So I'm going to just read a few words about each one from their biographies, and then after that we will begin the discussion. So I want to start with Mr. Henry Wang. Mr. Henry is an international executive, author, and speaker with extensive high-level business expertise globally, president of Gate International, and was former director of both Shell China and SABIC in Riyadh. So he knows how the oil people think. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, FRSA, and fellow of Institute of Chemical Engineering. He's a board member of London University SOAS Advisory Board and University College London China Advisory Board, plus China Carbon Forum Advisory Board. And he has joined the G20 and B20 Global Leaders Task Force, published over 100 papers and speeches, plus 5 books globally. And he is undertaking charity work on climate leadership and sustainability globally. So we look forward to having him share his words with us. Also, we just had Mr. Henry Soediarko grace us at the keynote speech. So he is the head of portfolio management at First Estate Capital Management in Singapore, and a portfolio manager for the award-winning Climate Impact Asia Fund, which we're very honored as part of the MBSB group to launch with him. He has been researching under-researched mid-cap Asian stocks since the inception of his career, including Japan, South Korea, Greater China, and ASEAN for almost 2 decades, both long and short. He has an MBA from Valeric Business School, MSc from City University of London, as well as BEC from in Holland University, and a certificate in principles of sustainable finance from Erasmus University. And a fun fact, he's a 2nd level degree black belt in full contact karate. So we want to use some of those skills to break the boards of climate change. Okay. And last but not least, we have Cintia Nunes, who's going to be joining us. She is the general manager, head of the Mills Fabrica Asia, leading the team to become the go-to platform for sustainability, impact, and innovation in textile, not textiles, technology and lifestyle, and agri-food tech space via Fabrica's investment portfolio, incubation program, interactive spaces, and its environmental and social impact accountability. And prior to joining Fabrica, she worked in strategy, insights, and marketing at an FMCG multinational company, where she focused on assessing customer behaviors, insights, and formalizing business strategies for more than 10 brands. She then pivoted to a Series A apparel startup, where she helped drive brand awareness, customer acquisition, and retail and customer experience. And then she joined the social impact-led platform, where she helped to pivot its business model, soon making it one of the prominent ecosystem builders in Hong Kong through advocacy, bridging of resources, and strategic partnerships. So she holds a BSc in economics from the University College in London. So those are our panelists, and I'm very blessed to work with MBSB, to join recently as their group Shariah and sustainability officer. So we're an Islamic bank, and we seek to integrate sustainability as well as Islamic principles and ethical principles in throughout our operations and our strategy. And I've previously done work with the World Bank as well as the UNEP-FI on the principles of sustainable banking. I'm very honored to be with all of you and to learn from you, and hopefully we can come out with some things that can benefit our listeners and benefit the society. So with that, I just want to, say a few words about kind of the session background. So COP29, has been dubbed as the climate finance COP for its central goal, which is to agree on how much money should go each year to helping developing countries cope with climate-related costs, to be determined by the new collective quantified goal. And of course, sitting in Malaysia, ASEAN is very important for Malaysia. We are the chairman for ASEAN. Of course, ASEAN, consists of developing countries, mainly developing countries. And, because of this, there's a need for, collaboration throughout ASEAN, as well as with other countries who can assist ASEAN in the goal of decarbonizing. So with that, I want to ask the panel. I have 3 questions, and then each one of you can choose which one you prefer. So my first question is about, what is ASEAN's collective climate ambition, and how are individual member states aligning their national policies with the regional goals? Maybe Henry Wang may want to take that. And then I have another question about, what would you say are the key challenges that ASEAN faces in achieving these ambitions? And then either one of our distinguished speakers may want to take that one. And are there any opportunities to be given focusing on overcoming the hurdles and helping ASEAN not only reach their ambitions, but exceed it? So first is what ASEAN is kind of doing, and what are the challenges and what are the opportunities? So we can go to each one, and you can share kind of your thoughts on one or all of these questions. So we can start with Mr. Henry Wang.
Thank you very much, Ashraf, for your excellent introduction and moderation. I'm today. I think the question you ask about ASEAN's climate ambition is a very important one. I was honored to be invited by the Indonesia president and the Indian prime minister when they are G20 presidents to join the G20 Climate, Energy and Sustainability Task Force. Basically, the prime minister and president invited about 100 to 150 CEOs and experts around the world to work together for 10 months between beginning of the year to about October, where we work together to prepare the policy recommendations and suggestions for, in the form of a white paper for the prime minister and the president to present as G20 president to all the G20 leaders in the world during the G20 summit. So for this year, you probably heard on the news that Brazil will be hosting the G20 summit this week, where they will again discuss our recommendations. And I'm sure that the presidents and the prime ministers who participated will then be sharing their thoughts and also giving new instructions to their representatives at COP29 so that they can achieve a satisfactory outcome from negotiations. So in terms of ASEAN climate ambitions, I think my personal views from working with the Indonesian president and the Prime Minister of India and other leaders around the world is ASEAN is very supportive of the climate ambitions. They understand that climate change is one of the most serious risks to the world, and they have signed the Paris Agreement, and they are working very hard on their own actions in achieving this. Now, this is fully in line with the new principle that the Indonesian president presented to the G20 leaders when he was the president of G20. His new principle is called common but differentiated responsibility. This means that each of the G20 leaders will agree that they should all work together to mitigate climate change around the world, but they recognize the sovereign interest of different countries, and therefore each country is fully in its own sovereign rights to develop its own action plans. And that's why you see each of the countries developing its NDCs, and they will be presenting these in COP29 for review by UNFCCC experts. But let me give you a very good example that demonstrates the commitment of ASEAN to the climate ambitions and also to green finance. I think it is very exciting that in COP26 in Glasgow, Michael Bloomberg, another group working with G20 leaders, has launched the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. This is an alliance where the CEO of the 100 biggest investment banks and banks around the world all work together and committed to support net zero and carbon neutrality. So as such, they have discussed with ASEAN and set up a very important chapter in ASEAN areas. And they are now advising different ASEAN countries on green finance. And one very, very good example I will share with you when the Indonesian president, the new Indonesian president, invited me to speak to his cabinet and others, is that GF, the Green Finance Alliance for Net Zero, is now working with the Indonesian investment authorities on early retirement of coal-fired power stations. Now, this is fully in line with the decisions in COP20 and also in G20 to phase out coal power fire stations. And they are now working together, the Indonesian investment authority is working together with DBS under the guidance of the Green Finance Alliance for Net Zero in phasing out all fire power stations in Indonesia. So this will make a material contribution to phasing out coal and also eliminating carbon emissions, plus promoting green finance in ASEAN areas. Hope this answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. I think that's really useful for helping us to set the scene. Henry, let's go to the other Henry, Soediarko. What would you like to share regarding this issue, whether it's from the ASEAN's goals and what they're doing, or the challenges or the opportunities? Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ashraf. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Henry Wang, on your comments about where ASEAN is responding to the challenges for net zero, to reach net zero. I think I'm very, very happy to see where the Southeast Asian countries have come together, directly or indirectly, to work through on achieving net zero, because everybody in this region understands that increased global temperature is a no joke to us, because we are literally at the equator, a lot of us, right? So we actually feel the heat probably to some degrees more than other people. And we've seen governments around the world, around this region, actually come up with policies, right? In Singapore, they have actually come up with a lot of MOUs to get carbon credits or RECs from other countries, and they also have been supportive in terms of putting electric vehicles on the road, right? By offering incentives, similar in Malaysia that I just discussed at length. In other countries, including Indonesia, they also have, like what Henry Wang earlier mentioned about the early retirement for coal-fired power plants, and it doesn't stop there, right? There has been a lot of government policies that would actually support the decarbonization in this part of the world. Now, the challenge is, of course, there's never be enough supports at the beginning, right? And we face that challenges all over the world, not only in ASEAN, but also in the global north as well. Now, what are the opportunities? The opportunities is that this area is full of smaller companies, innovative companies that have not been receiving attention from global investors, right? So we know in Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, right? There are companies that actually making inroads to ensure that decarbonizations will happen, right? Through their roles as part of the value chain, to their role as manufacturers, right? As we know, ASEAN typically benefits from when the Sino-US war actually happened. So a lot of work's actually being rerouted from China as a manufacturing hub to Southeast Asia, predominantly in Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, right? So this has become an opportunity for the region to actually step up and say, we can also contribute to decarbonization, not only for the region, but also for the rest of the world.
Thank you very much, Henry, for those inspiring words. Cintia, please share your thoughts on this topic.
Thanks, Ashraf. So I think I will try to address your third question on the opportunities and hurdles. So the Mills Fabrica, we come in as a venture investor in the space, although we focus mainly on textile and agri-food, which are probably, we're saying that we're responsible for 40% of the greenhouse gases emissions globally. So it's huge. And that's why we selected these two industries to make a contribution to. As a venture investor, we invest in seed stage to A stages startups, or with their own technologies, trying to find a green solution to the two industries that I just mentioned. I personally believe that investors are a key driver to climate agendas. We're putting in funding, we're putting in not only funding, but also ecosystem support to grow these technologies and to make them flourish. Of course, as a strategic investor, we want them to do well. So it's really not just about the money. It really is about a lot of strategic relationships and connections. So what we do is we also provide them with connections in the investor space, brands, retailers, suppliers, that all, I'd say, quite hopeful to say. In fact, there is an urgency for brands and big conglomerates to look for these green solutions. I think back in the old days, green or sustainability is like a nice buzzword, like a nice to have, right? But right now, there's urgency and it's a must-have. So in the past 3 years of operation, we realized that more and more brands, retailers, and conglomerates are coming to us for innovations, disruptive innovations, to make them at least to help them achieve their sustainability goals. And you could see from those conversations that we've had so far, there's desperateness in it. Which is a good thing. We all realize that is something that we need a solution to, and therefore investors like us, we come in and offer our help in scouting for the right innovations for them to adopt into their day-to-day functions. And I think, needless to say, we all need to not just think about it and really put an action to it. So I think just to have a quick sum up of what I just shared there, we invest. Investors are our key driver to the climate agendas. We come in with funding that absorbs really early risks, but at the same time, it is all our interest to make them flourish. So we connect them with the right networks, from brands to conglomerates, so that they too can adopt those. Because at the end of the day, without the big engines, which is the big corporates coming into place and adapt those innovations, we're not going to get those solutions out there. So investors need to work with companies and bridge them with these innovations to make things work.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cintia. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper in the work that you're doing for our more deeper questions. So can you just elaborate a bit more, Cintia, on how do you see venture investors contributing to sustainable investment in ASEAN, especially in driving disruptive innovation to tackle climate change? So maybe that question, for you as well as Henry Soediarko can maybe chime in as well.
Yeah, certainly. So of course, as our day-to-day job, we do our due diligence. So as rule of thumb, we review over thousands of startups, and we probably invest in one or two. That speaks to the robust due diligence that we do, and that pretty much is a very important piece of work that we do, because we are choosing the right solution that has a market need in order for them to receive the funding. And that's kind of a thumbs up. Okay, we support you. There's a great potential. Due diligence work is important. Secondly, as I shared a bit of during the intro, is not only the funding is important, the financing, but really the right connections and the networks that we share across different stages of their growth. So not only investors, but really industry players, research academies, and people that are really pulling in their weights and their knowledge and technical expertise to make any startup work. When we talk about, it takes a village to raise a child, I'd say it takes a whole world to raise a startup. So it's really all about collaborations, and we as investors, we're not the one organization that can make change. We need to work with other people, other organizations, and therefore, yes, our day-to-day is to look for the right investments, but frankly speaking, it's really about connections and connecting the startups and innovators with the right people, and frankly, other investors that could take the baton and place more investments, because we just come in at early stage. So for example, Series B stage beyond would need to go to the institutional investors, and we have connections in those two that could help those startups.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I know, Henry, you're not doing startups, you're doing, I think, companies with a 200 million plus market cap, right? So maybe from your side, where do you see the greatest opportunities for green investments, and what criteria should investors prioritize?
I think, thanks, Ashraf. I think one of the key important things that Cintia mentioned earlier, and which I also agreed, and to say the least, I would have not profusely about this, is that due diligence is very important, not only on the companies on how they conduct business, not only on corporate governance, but also in our space of investment, actually the green impact. We don't want to invest in companies without impact on decarbonization. That's our key focus. So between profit and purpose and green, right? All three must check out, right? We cannot invest in one only and not the other two, right? So all three must be satisfied. Now, interestingly, about how to collaborate between a VC or early startup investors and public equity investors like us, right? There's a lot of room for collaboration, actually. What I would like to see is to talk to the VC. What are the innovations that you have seen so far, right? Because some of these companies could actually either be a target of takeover of the larger companies that we know, that we understand, right, within the same line, or it could disrupt some of the companies that actually larger companies that we invested or we doesn't belong to our universe, right? Which means some of these companies that we can't invest might get disrupted even further, which means it also create opportunity for the companies that we like because they also promote decarbonization, while the others don't promote decarbonization and will be disrupted by the companies that people like Cintia, Nunes, and Mills Fabrica actually invested on, right? So collaboration is very, very important here. And we only have one main goal. Two main goals, actually, for, if I may. One is obviously for profit. Number two is to save the earth. So collaborative effort is very, very important.
Thank you very much. So I want to move to Henry Wang. We spoke about the VC markets. We spoke about equities. Banking, of course, is a key in the financial sector. And you did mention about the banking coalition, some of the banking coalitions that have been established. So can you just share about how ASEAN's financial institutions can leverage this coalition to accelerate the region's transition to net zero?
Thank you for that very important question. This is actually an area that we have very much focused on. When I was honored to be invited to join the ESG in Business Action Council that was chaired by the Prime Minister Modi of India when he was G20 president. I think he recognized, and the G20 leaders recognized, that green finance is actually a very important and growing area. But there is actually a lot of disparity between banks and financial institutions, VCs, and public equity investors on the criteria that they approach what they call green finance. And also when investors approach this institution investors, VCs, and now there is no uniformity in terms of what they can pitch in terms of their projects to VCs, public equity investors, and that sort of thing. And therefore, the G20 leaders recognize the importance of that this is very important that for banks and financial investors, VCs and others to work together. And therefore, in COP26 in Glasgow, they took the initiative with the help of Michael Bloomberg and other leading financial leaders around the world to coerce to 150 CEO of the top investment banks, financial institutions, and trusts of different companies around the world. The names will include all the biggest names in the world, so I will not repeat the names here for commercial reasons. But very importantly, these 150 CEOs have pledged half of their banks and financial institutions to work together to promote mitigation of climate change and carbon neutrality. And they are also working together to share best practices around the world and establishing new best practices so as to there will be a level playing ground for all the banks, VCs, and investors around the world where they can go to. A very good example I can give is in coal. I mean, after the decision in the different COP meetings to phase out coal, I think that is generally now in investment banks, they have around the world, they have issued guidance to their fund managers and investment analysts that their bank will not be investing in coal-fired power station projects. So it's now extremely difficult for a developer for coal-fired power station projects to get funding for their coal-fired power station projects, which could lead to a lot of carbon emissions. But on the other hand, there are a lot of green finance opportunities for phasing out of coal-fired power stations and also in clean coal technologies. These are two examples I like to give on the other side. A good example is what the Indonesian Investment Authority is working with DBS on the phasing out of coal-fired power stations. Other good green finance example is how different companies are developing clean coal technology to use coal in a clean way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henry. So a number of panelists have mentioned about, the need for measurements, impact, and also Henry just mentioned about the standards. There's some lack of consistency amongst the standards. So I have a question for the panel. What strategies can be adopted to prevent greenwashing while promoting transparency and accountability in green finance? So maybe we can start with Henry Soediarko.
Thanks, Ashraf. I think this is addressing the elephant in the room that some people are not even comfortable on discussing this, right? So our partnership with WWF actually ensures that we have to be non-greenwashers, because if we are, then we wouldn't have that partnership to start with. As you said, there is no real standard across the board right now, right? And which is pretty confusing and to a certain degree frustrating, right? But it also presents an opportunity for people like us and Cintia who wants to do the right thing, right? Invest with integrity, invest with purpose. So for us, for example, we co-developed the dark green screen, right? That basically said that 50% of the company's revenue must come from decarbonization businesses. That includes renewable energy management service, and low carbon water treatment, environmental service, and so on, right? But one of the most important thing is that for us is the need to be able to measure and quantify this, right? Because for us, you can say whatever you want about how green your investments are, but how do you measure this, right? If we are investors, we measure the financial return by the IRR or the annual return, right? Average annual return per year. But on the impact side, it's also very difficult to measure this, right? So we actually is very happy to to work together with a third party called Net Purpose, who basically help us to quantify the climate impact, right? By basically measuring the decarbonization business activities emissions in terms of metric tons against the baseline emissions of the existing technologies. So, for example, if you go to your work with your combustion engines car, Toyota or Mercedes, right? And that's, let's say your emission is 10,000 metric ton per year, right? And if you price it, you actually bought an electric vehicles, right? Let's say the emission is only 3,000 metric tons per year. So you actually reduce 7,000 metric tons per year, right? That we know we can quantify this. So as a result, as a fund, we are able to quantify how much climate impact that comes from our investment and investing in the decarbonization business. So for us, that's very, very important. Be able to measure and to be green. Over to you, Cintia.
Thank you. Yes, 100% to what Henry just said. But I think with venture investments, it's even more tough. With these startups, they're very early stage. Some are even lab stage, not even to the market yet. So how do we do this? Yes, impact and what are they producing that is as an outcome, could have an impactful outcome to us is very important. So from a venture investment standpoint, so we actually have an in-house due diligence system that tracks the process during and after the due diligence. So of course, during the due diligence, we have a bunch of questions, of course, besides all the financial requirements, but we have a bunch of impact questions that we need to go through each and every startup that we want to make an investment in. As simple as what is their theory of change? What is their input, output, outcome? How do they see their impact? What would they foresee their startup's impact to be when they reach, a certain scale, and what sort of scale, with what resources? These questions are very important to us because, again, like I said, some of these technologies are nowhere near the market yet, and we need to really understand, most importantly, what the founding team is thinking. Venture investment is always about investing in people. Yes, on the product, but you are investing in the people that are really making these innovations work. So it is important for us to really know and understand what these people are thinking and how they see that impact. How would they try to measure it from the get-go? And we do see even early stage investments are able to provide us with a very simple life cycle assessments, an LCA, that could track some of these measurements. At minimum, they're able to provide an impact measurement bottom up, say, as actually Henry also said, if their market or if their product can make it to the market, could they prevent X amount of waste being dumped into the landfill with Y amount of impact that could be realized, and so on. So ultimately, yes, it is really challenging because there is no standard system that we could make a reference to. But it is important for us to rationally go through this with each and every startup. What is their intention? And even sometimes it strikes our surprises, even amongst our internal team, we always discuss about the unintended consequences. So sometimes startups, they come up with a green solution, but then we'll talk, okay, if this startup and this technology is in the market, would there be a negative impact that we are not seeing right now? So for instance, one of the startups that we have looked into very recently, we've actually made an investment in the end. The startup actually uses plant cell culture and precision ferment it and make it to become just another piece of chocolate. A bit of context, due to climate change, where we grow our chocolate and cacao beans, the yields are dramatically decreasing due to climate change. And so a lot of innovators and startups are looking for alternative cacao solutions. And we've been looking into this sector for almost a year now. So we've invested in 2 startups that are looking at this solution. And one, as I said, uses plant cell culture. But during the due diligence process, internally, we discussed amongst ourselves, okay, when and if they're able to scale, are they going to take over small farmers' livelihoods? Are they able to make a living? And so these questions are all very important to us, and we need to have a very clear rationale behind every single investments that we make. So this year we actually put out there, distributed our second impact report that speaks to all our investments that we have invested so far and how we see the impact, how they quantify it, and even to this current very early stage, how much impact they have already made to the climate, if not the community that they work with. So very important, very tough, no standard answer. But I think as an investor, we just need to be staying very clear-minded and ask as many questions as we can. It is our job, and to be able to validate those impacts along the way. And of course, after the investment, then how we monitor, how we measure. Even if they cannot make the impact that they originally put forth, what is it? What's the transition? What's the transformation here? Are they making other areas? That's okay. But they need to be able to speak very clearly to what they're trying to do, so that either we could make follow-on investment, if not, we can make a really good referral to other investors for them to invest that also care about the climate.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia. So I want to shift to carbon credits. I mean, I think this is a market that's very interesting, that's developing. It's different stages of development while ASEAN countries. It has certain challenges and opportunities. So I would like to hear from the panel your thoughts on, carbon markets in ASEAN or in Malaysia, since we're under the Malaysian pavilion. Kind of your thoughts about the opportunities and the challenges in that area. Who would like to start? Maybe I'll let Henry
I can start.
for the article. Yeah, go ahead. I'm excited about this question.
No, I think this is very interesting time, and yet also very, very critical for a lot of countries around the world, especially in Southeast Asia, because there has been some confusion and inconsistencies on the carbon markets and carbon tax, and also what are the activities that can receive carbon credits, right? So we don't there has been no standard so far, right? I mean, we know about the Vera and Gold standard. We know some of the companies actually receive carbon credits. I actually invested in a few companies in Indonesia because they said we're going to get the carbon credits very soon, and therefore it should help us to get another stream of revenue, which increases our ROE, right? But then we found out that the carbon credits that they generated were only allowed to be transacted domestically, right? Because I know the biggest buyer for all of these are typically the larger MNCs. So and then we thought, we had an internal discussion. So what is the standard for carbon credit, right? We know more about this, but interestingly, each of the exchanges in Malaysia, you have Bursa Carbon Exchange, BCX. In Singapore, we have a Climate Impact X, right? Indonesia, there's also a carbon exchange. In Thailand, I think they have started to discuss about this. But what's interesting is that there's an approval of the standards a few days ago that negotiated during the COP29, that there's an article of 6.4, also known as a Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, that identifies and supports verifiable emission reduction projects, that helps draw funding needed to implement them, and encourages cooperation among countries and companies who are interested in utilizing such projects to reduce their carbon footprint. So I think we just had a very, very important and critical step in this COP29, which I think, and I hope, will actually set the standard for very verifiable emission reduction projects, which will lead to the creation of carbon credits, right? So I think we're just about to embark this in a much larger wave than before.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, thank you for this very important question and the good point that Henry has made in this. I can give more information on this. This actually, the disparity, the carbon market and carbon credit are actually an area of uniform interest. And it is an important part of the Paris Agreement under Article 6.4. And in fact, this is an area that in the teams that I've been involved in the G20, led by the G20 leaders, this is an area of big discussion. And the G20 leaders, in our recent team on the climate and sustainability, led by Prime Minister Modi when he was G20 leader, G20 president, we specifically discussed this and made some new policy recommendation to the G20 leader, which includes the establishment of uniform carbon standards and guidelines. But we recognize that these developments has to be taken under the G20 principle of common but differentiated responsibility. What does this mean? It means that the G20 countries and different countries around the world, including Malaysia, Singapore, other countries, recognize the importance of carbon markets and carbon credits. However, under the differentiated responsibility principle, each of these countries are free to set up their own carbon exchange and have their own carbon system. But on the other hand, these systems should all work together a common framework. And that's why the G20 leaders, one of the recommendations under the climate task force, the G20 climate task force, led by Prime Minister Modi, which he presented on our behalf to the G20 leaders, was to develop a set of uniform international standards, which each of the countries can implement in their own carbon market. So now you can see this actually policy in action. I think Henry making a good point that in COP29, this is a key point of discussion. And I'm glad that they are now making progress towards this uniform carbon standard, which each of the carbon markets in the ASEAN countries can be implemented. So there are important markets in Malaysia, Singapore. Hong Kong is setting up a carbon market, and then Thailand and other. And my own expectation is that you will see different countries doing that. China is already pushing ahead with their carbon system, their internal carbon system, targeting particularly the big industrial emissions. And looking ahead, I think the mega trend will be for all these markets, carbon markets around the world in different countries, to work together under the G20 principle of common but differentiated responsibility, i.e. they will all be pushing for adaptations of carbon credits around the world, but they will be working towards under a uniform global framework, but developed with national characteristics which will suit their own country. In Indonesia, or in Hong Kong, they would all have their own special rules in this case. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. So I have a question for Cintia, specifically around agri-tech. I know this is one of the areas of interest for you in your investing, and agri-tech has vast potential in ASEAN. What are the key challenges that you face when investing in this sector, and where do you see the most promising opportunities?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Ashraf. So I think early stage investment is always challenging, not just ag tech, but yes. For textile and agri-food tech, these technologies need a certain scale to really prove its viability. And their development cycle is extremely long. So sometimes venture investors, we scratch our heads. How are we able to, speak to our financial returns and our expectations? How long should we set the exits to be, So it is important for us to think, even as a venture investor, what our expectations are. And if we are coming in with a thesis that supports startups and innovations that relatively require a relatively longer development cycles, then this is an adjustment that we need to make for our expectations. That's number one. Now, I think second is that getting to a certain scale, as I think I've said a few times today, is that brands and companies also need to come in and adopt these technologies, because not until any other investors see the traction in any of these innovations, other investors may not come in to support. They cannot, because they cannot see that commercial viability yet. So it is important for companies to come in who takes that leap of faith and go, I see really great potential with this startup. So how about I come in with a pilot? That is something that I could absorb. Could we work together? Now, that's extremely important, which sometimes I think in the industries that we work with is what even investors are thinking about and trying to push forward. Because, as I said, investors coming with money, but it is the companies that need to come in and adopt these technologies into their industries, into their businesses. But yes, you know, there are investors who do come in with technical expertise. So, for example, a fund that we've invested in comes in with 3 decades of agri expertise. And they also have farmlands as their assets that could really do asset tests with these startups. So that really could help us to further assess, you know, their potentials. And I think, you know, for ASEAN countries, technologies that we too actually have invested in another fund, but focuses in fashion and textile, there's a lot of potentials because manufacturing and ag is huge here. It is definitely an area that we're looking in. But yes, Ashraf, I actually also want to just address your previous question on the carbon. I know that both Henrys have addressed pretty much broadly, but I think another point that I want to raise here is that for our investments, we actually, of course, look at carbon, but we also see a great potential in seeing that solution with a more broader climate sense. And by saying that, we refer to the planetary boundaries by the Stockholm Resilience Center that says, or has done multiple years of research in, that there are 9 key areas or impact areas that are destabilizing the Earth right now. So carbon, of course, very important, greenhouse gases. We also have the water use, land use, chemical inflows and outflows that are all destabilizing the climate that we're living in here today. So for our investments, we actually tackle and hope to tackle multiple areas in each investment so that we do not have just, you know, the carbon vision tunnel, but we actually look at the solution as a whole. So I thought that was just important to raise.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I want to ask Mr. Henry Wang, previously in some of our discussions, you know, offline, you spoke about biogas and the opportunities in biogas for, you know, decarbonization and transition, particularly around, you know, just transitions in ASEAN. So maybe can you share your thoughts on the importance of and the position of biogas for facilitating, you know, a just transition in ASEAN?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very important area. I think Asian countries are now progressing fast on the clean energy transition. So a lot of countries are pushing ahead, all the different Asian countries are pushing ahead with solar, wind, hydro power. But at the same time, they are recognizing the importance of biofuel and biogas. Now, this is actually fully in line with the G20 principle of common and differentiated responsibility. And a very good example is the recent important speech by the new Indonesia president that he made in the Qatar Economic Forum, where he outlined his country's commitment to climate goals and the Paris Agreement. And we all know that Indonesia is now importing diesel fuel, and it's a huge amount of diesel fuel that they're importing, and it is causing their country a forex balance of $20 billion. So the new Indonesian president outlined in his keynote speech in the Qatar Economic Forum that he wants to stop it under his administration. And what he's proposing is actually a very important circular economy development, which we have actually had the honor of discussing with his team and cabinet. What he's doing is he's had a fundamental look at Indonesia's economy and social structure and infrastructure. And he said Indonesia has a huge amount of palm oil, has a lot of poverty, has a lot of agricultural population. And therefore, but on the other hand, the country is paying $20 billion for the diesel import. So over his administration term, he wants to phase out all the diesel import and replace it with biofuel and he wants to use the palm oil and the agricultural base they have to establish a new circular economy. I think this is tremendously exciting because this will contribute to just transition where he will be helping the underprivileged and the agricultural and farmers in his country. At the same time, he will be upgrading the palm oil and others into a very useful biofuel and biogas, which they will be passing new legislations to enforce their mix. I mean, these developments are already going on in other countries like Brazil and the US, where Brazil is like using biofuel in all the cars. There's, I think, in my book, I've talked about the Brazil circular economy, sugarcane circular economy biofuel, where I think the Brazilian government told me there is now no car in Brazil that is not running on biofuel. So all the cars are now running on biofuel and in future biogas and other areas. So I think this is the perfectly acceptable circular economy, new circular economy that is applicable in ASEAN countries. I think I'm very happy that Indonesia has taken the lead, but I think similar circular economy models and biofuel, biogas models can be established in Malaysia, in Thailand, and Cambodia and agricultural countries where you have a strong agricultural base. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Henry. So I think we have about 10 minutes left. So I want to take some questions and encourage the audience to just send in your questions. So we do have one question here. We spoke about the elephant in the room. This is an even bigger elephant in the room, which is, how do you see Trump's presidential, assuming the U.S. presidency would impact the climate change agenda? So I'd like to just kind of hear on, for everyone, how they're looking at this, maybe how it reflects, how it maybe may affect your investments and opportunities, and what are your thoughts? Maybe we can start with Henry Soediarko.
Thanks, Ashraf. I find this is very timely and interesting, especially when President Trump is just sworn in for his second time as a president. He is well known to with his plan that he thinks that climate change is a hoax, right? So this is something that everybody expect that he's going to scale back on the investments on the green, and he thinks that President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, will be scaled back, right? But there are two things that we could see from here of the latest observation from my part is actually one, President Trump is always keen to create jobs, to bring jobs back to the United States. Therefore, fending off the illegal immigrants, make it more difficult for them to come on board to the US, which unfortunately will increase inflation, right? But it does keep jobs within the US, create jobs for the Americans. Now, the IRA, right, actually create jobs within the United States, right? So it does somewhat contradictory to what he said and to what he wanted to do, right? So his motto is that no, I think the climate change is hoax, yet it does bring jobs for the Americans. And number two, one of President Trump's biggest ally and influential ally is actually Elon Musk, right? So Elon Musk, as we know, has built Tesla from the ground up into a real serious contender in the transport, right, as an electric vehicles, which inevitably reduce carbon emission, right? So it's very interesting to see how President Trump is actually going to address his policy or change his policy going forward, right? So let's wait and see, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think time has caught up to us, so we're going to have to close up. But I mean, I think it was a pleasure hosting everyone here, and I think we learned about the opportunities that ASEAN has, that the leaders are aligned, business people are aligned, the intention is there. We heard about the principle for, differentiated responsibility. Everyone coordinates and understands their responsibility, but every country will develop and reflect that responsibility in a different way. The importance of transparency, of impact analysis, and the opportunities that investing in the green transition across ASEAN. I want to thank all of you for your time here, and thank the Secretariat for having this opportunity to have this session together. Take care, everyone. I wish you all the best.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for the great discussion. So again, before we proceed, please take a quick moment to scan the QR code for our survey. Your feedback will be very helpful for us to enhance your experience at future events. Meanwhile, it's my privilege to introduce our final panel discussion for today, titled Role of the Board, What is Needed for Impactful Transition Finance, which is curated by the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, ICDM. Our speaker lineup for today include Ms. Ho Yue Mi, Independent Director of CIMB Group, Ms. Regina Rahim, Advisor for the Institutional Investors Council Malaysia, IIC, followed by Ms. Sarah Ferhas, Independent Director of various publicly listed companies, and of course, Ms. Jackie Ma, Executive Vice President of ICDM, will be our moderator for this session. Over to you, Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you, Shen. Firstly, I apologize. I think I've been having backdrop issues the entire day. So never mind. Since we have our panelists here, I would like to welcome everyone to the session today on the role of the board, what is needed for impactful transition finance. So before I introduce everyone, if I could just set the context for today's discussion. The Asia-Pacific region is currently facing a significant gap in the race to fund decarbonization, estimated at US 1.1 trillion by the International Monetary Fund. So there are views now that investment in mitigation represents the majority of transition funding. And the more complicated task of climate adaptation, well, the need to change systems, behaviors, and whole economies is receiving less attention. Now, against the backdrop of COP29 conversations and growing calls for scale-up ambitions on climate finance, this morning, we will look into the critical role of the board in facilitating an impactful transition finance. We all know that it's essential to explore how governance can drive meaningful financial commitments towards sustainability. So we will look into how boards can ensure that investment decisions prioritize not just immediate returns, but also long-term impacts on climate resilience and social equity. And most importantly, what are the frameworks they can implement to effectively assess the risk and opportunities associated with transition finance? Well, with us today are three esteemed panelists who will help us uncover some good practices and innovative approaches that hopefully will empower boards in championing their organization in getting their transition finance right. Let me start with Sarah Fairhurst. She is currently an independent director on a number of companies in the energy sector in the Philippines. She's a seasoned strategy consultant with more than 30 years in the energy sector, specializing in energy markets, infrastructure projects, commercial contracts, government policy, regulatory issues, and corporate strategy. Welcome, Sarah. And then we move on to Ho Yut Mi. Yut Mi serves as an independent non-executive director on boards of several local and international institutions. In Malaysia, she sits on the board of CIMB Group Holdings, where she currently chairs the Board Sustainability and Governance Committee. She's currently a trustee of WWF Malaysia and ex-partner at EY. And our third panelist, Regina. Regina Rahim is the advisor of Institutional Investor Council, Malaysia. Up until 2021, Regina was the founding MD for the Malaysian office of Nomura Asset Management, which she grew from scratch to an award-winning firm with over 30 billion in assets under management. She remains actively involved with the industry through her advisory and board roles, as well as various investment committees, including Islamic finance and women leadership. For myself, I'm from the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia. Our aim at ICDM is to raise the effectiveness of board directors. So today's conversation is very important into looking at how boards can strengthen their role in the oversight of transitioning financing. Now, maybe let me just start with Yut Mi. If I could request for Yut Mi's slide to be shared, just a brief, yes, thank you. Yut Mi, maybe I start with you. Please do tell us a little bit about your experience and your opinion about why transition finance, why now? I know you've chosen this visual to share specifically.
Yeah, well, in terms of experience, as you introduced, I am with the Group Sustainability Committee, as well as I sit on the board of WWF. So these are some of my experiences. I'm also writing a research paper on palm oil with Cambridge. So that's the other angle that I'm really interested in. Now, why did I choose this visual? I'm sure many of you would have watched this Netflix series, Three Body Problem. The crux of this series is about how aliens are coming towards planet Earth. And of course, people on the planet are all really, really worried. But then they found out that they're only coming in 400 years. So then the dilemma to the people then was, do they work on the problem now, or kick the can down the road and say, you know what, my future generations will worry about it. Now, fortunately for them, they have 400 years to think about it. But for us, I'm sure we all know, our time frame is so very different. So whenever we say, hey, why are we working on this now? To me, it's the other visual. It is coming our way, like it or not. And the time frame, we are talking about 2050, right? We have to get ourselves in order by 2050 at the very latest, at less than 1.5 trajectory. Otherwise, we are really in deep trouble. So I thought I thought I would start with this so that we don't even have to think about why you have to do it. We just have to do it. Yeah. And so why do we need transition finance? So we need to think about, if we really want to fix a problem, we need to think about the whole society approach, the whole economy approach. So some of the sectors it's very easy for them to transition to the greener aspects of the economy. But there are some, the harder to abate ones. They have a lot of difficulty because they need a whole lot more funds, they need fresh technologies, they need a lot of help. And so this is what we mean by transition finance being crucial. If you want the whole economy to transition, we need to help even the harder ones. Thank you.
Thanks, Yut Mi. Sarah, briefly.
Why do we need it now? I've been in the energy sector for more than 30 years, and I've bid on coal-fired power stations that are 40 years old to buy them in order to keep them going for longer. A coal-fired power station built today will have an economic life of 40 years. And that's why we need to start today. because here in Asia, we have growing populations, we have growing economic growth, we have growing electricity demand. And if we don't do something now, people will build coal-fired power stations because otherwise we will basically be in the dark. That's why we have to start now.
Thank you. Thank you. And Regina, your thoughts on that?
Hi, everyone. Regina here. Right. I think basically where we've been coming from the Malaysian perspective is that even when you look at the JC3, I think it was very obvious that green financing alone wasn't going to solve the problem. So technically, for me, transition finance is basically, we really need to have a more forward-thinking type of solution here, right? And so because transition finance basically enables that, basically it works like a bridge to connect the businesses and individuals as well. I think that's very key, that we need to also think about individuals in terms of making those changes that are both financially feasible as well as environmentally responsible. So it's a tool to drive change without leaving any communities or businesses behind. So I think it's really about supporting real world solutions, and that's basically why we're talking about, right? So transition finance is basically the tool to drive change and not just leave it to just a bunch of tree huggers to just say, okay, we've got to change the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there is a lot more, conversations and drive towards moving from green finance towards transition finance. So on that context, maybe a question for all as well. So given the ongoing global push towards net zero emissions and a lot of pressure on high emission sectors to decarbonize, the path remains quite complex and uncertain, especially in markets like Asia, where there are energy transition gaps and also financing gaps and challenges. So on that point that Regina has made about bridging the gap, do you believe now that it's becoming more of a necessity than a choice for companies in the region? Yudmi, maybe I hand this over to you. I know that CIMB has this year announced, your climate targets for the ONG and real estate sectors on certain decarbonization and targets. What do you think?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely essential. I'm going to tell a little use a little analogy. It's like if you have two kids, one child very compliant, even before you ask them to do all the right things, to do it. And then there's another child who's more on the age, operating at the age, wanting to do right, but don't have the capacity. Maybe they need a bit of help. So for sure, we need to help this other group of sectors, right? So that's why CIMB have come up with sector papers on the plantation, because it's also high carbon intensive. On cement, we have come out on that as well, on ONG and power generation as well. So yes, we have worked on it because we operate across MIST, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, particularly in Indonesia and Thailand as well. We know that there are so much opportunities for us to impact and bring about, initially maybe do less harm and eventually do more good with this hard to abate sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, your views?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? It was slightly different than the one we planned.
Yeah. So do you believe that it's transition finance is becoming more of a necessity than a choice for companies in the region?
I come from an energy background. So I've spent 30 years in energy, including fossil fuels and including in the renewable sector. And the company, one of the major companies I'm on the board of, a Singapore company, Equus Developments, we're looking at building renewables. And what's the issue with building renewables at the moment? The returns are actually very low. On the other side, on the Philippine board that I'm on the board of, we have a coal-fired power station, and we're looking to transition away from coal. We are talking to UNOPS. We have been talking to them on a transition finance plan for over a year now. We still haven't actually started doing anything useful. We've just been talking about setting up the project for a year now. And at the same time, the Department of Energy in the Philippines says, your site is one of only 3 in the Philippines that has a grandfathered permit to build a new coal-fired power station. So what do we do? From a board perspective, you actually have to take a decision about what's right for the country, what's right for the world, but also what's right for the shareholders. So we are sat with, do we use a different fuel? Can we get transition finance to shut the coal-fired power station down? What do we replace it with? Can we replace it as fast as you would actually be able to build Unit 2? Oh, and by the way, the site for Unit 2 currently has solar panels on it. So do we take those away? All of these things, trying to juggle the right decision for the shareholder who has purpose, very purposeful shareholder, but they're also a businessman who wants to make money. How do you juggle all of these pieces of the puzzle at the board level? Somebody coming in with transition finance would make all of that a lot easier. But as we've seen from our process with UNOPS, even talking about it is very complicated.
I guess we will discuss later about the challenges and really some advice, also from your experience, what boards can do to mitigate and to reduce the transition risk. Regina, your views on that? I think you've mentioned bridging the gap, but anything to add?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, especially from Malaysian public listed companies, right? There's over 1,040 now in terms of our companies that's listed on Bursa. So really, we are a net exporter economy. And given the fact that we are a net exporter, that means also that we need to also comply to all the various rulings that operate globally, right? So you've got your European CBAM and all that. So I don't think it's a choice anymore. I personally think that in order for us to have the financial resilience to still be around the next 10 years, 50 years, etc., companies are going to have to ensure that they've got the right frameworks in order to attract investors and keep investors attracted to stay invested. So I think it's definitely something that it's no longer a choice, it's a must do.
Thank you. So now maybe let's dive a little bit deeper. Sarah, I'd like to start with you on really from the start of this journey. Now, we know that Asia faced quite a unique challenge. You yourself have mentioned it as well, where you are, due to high reliance on fossil fuels and older infrastructure. As a board director, how do you see boards assessing and managing these risks related to legacy systems when you're considering transition finance solutions? And really what is needed to scale transition finance for larger projects, and maybe describe a little bit about the main barriers to this growth and really what directors can do to close this gap?
That's really a very difficult question, Jackie. I will say it is a very difficult question. And I think the first thing you need to do is to assess where you are. So what assets do you have? How old are they? What can you do with them? If you get rid of this legacy asset, what can you replace it with? How will you finance what you replace it with? How long will that take? How will you cover the cost, the lost profit of the thing that you're getting rid of with the new asset? I said that renewables currently have very low rates of return. The coal legacy assets have a reasonable rate of return because they're very low cost and they generate very reliable, large amounts of very reliable electricity. People have gone into those investments. And how do you actually replace those? What do you replace them with that will actually give us the same amount of money? And this is where the transition finance comes in. Can it bridge the gap? So for the coal-fired power station example I mentioned earlier, we seriously are considering, given that the government is saying you must, we need the power. You are one of the only people who can build a coal-fired power station, so you must build a coal-fired power station. And we're like, but we don't want to build a coal-fired power station. Can we build a transition coal-fired power station? Can we build a coal-fired power station that only runs for 10 years? Is that something that the international community will lean into? And I can tell you, I have spoken to quite a large number of international players, and they look at you as though you're completely nuts when you say, can I build a 10-year coal-fired power station because we need the security today? and it's very highly reliable, and we can get it up really quickly because we already have the site. So, you know, those challenges are very real, managing the security of supply. If you have a legacy asset, you have a responsibility to the country to actually do what it's there for, which is to generate electricity. Actually shutting down something that is already existing, that the country is relying on, is really challenging, even when, and the Philippines is very, very pro-climate. I mean, they're being hit by a super typhoon, like at the moment, that shouldn't be happening in November. They're really pro-moving into the new world, but actually getting there, actually getting the other technology built in time to keep the lights on is very challenging. So we need everybody working together, and we need all of the pieces of the puzzle to be working together. And when you're sitting chairing the strategy committee of the board, as I am, you know, we're asking ourselves, how do we ensure our coal-fired power station? If we built Unit 2, how would we insure it? Because nobody wants to insure coal-fired power station. How would we finance it? Because nobody wants to finance coal-fired power station. We want to shut it down. We want to build renewables, but then we also want to build batteries. And the infrastructure in the Philippines is not really working very well. Forget the batteries and the solar, so that we can actually match it with the base load. So how do you do it at the board level? I think it's like any other challenge, Jackie. You set up a committee. We have a strategy committee, which I chair. You look at what you've got, what your threats and opportunities are, what your alternatives are, and you try and plot a path forward. And it is a path forward. It is not an action today. It is a path. It is a strategy. It requires everyone to lean into it. I hope that
And do you
helps.
find that the board that you are on currently is sort of well equipped to drive this, to meet the challenges, the current board that you're sitting on?
In the Philippines, actually, I do. We have an independent chair, we have independent directors, we have a good balance of men and women. We have shareholders who have a very strong sense of purpose. They built this coal-fired power station in a remote region of the Philippines that otherwise had diesel or no power. So they were doing it to bring economic growth and electricity to a place that didn't have it. Back when, you know, it's only a 7-8-year-old power station. The world has just changed so much in a very short period of time. And so now, to be purposeful, you have to have lower emissions. So it's very important, I think, to have those shareholders aligned with the culture of the organization. And so this particular one, I think that the board is actually well equipped to make the right decision. The governance in the Philippines generally, the Department of Energy, the regulator, the transmission, none of those are really lined up to actually make decisions fast or to make decisions that are aligned with moving forward. And as a board, you can only operate in the environment you operate in. Sometimes if the country isn't ready, that's a challenge too.
No, thank you. So maybe at this point, we move on to the financing aspects of it. I'd like to ask a question on the fact that there is a joint study by B&M and World Bank highlighting that over half of Malaysian banks' commercial loan portfolios are exposed to sectors that are carbon intensive but essential for economic growth. So from CIMB Group's perspective, what are the key metrics or criteria that you use to assess whether a project qualifies for transition finance? And of course, how can the boards of these companies contribute once they get the financing towards developing a clear and data-backed corporate transition plan?
Thank you. Yeah, so we start off with our relationship manager or, you know, someone in the team identifying a deal. Once a deal has been, you know, sort of identified out there, then we will check against certain criteria. First, is it in the hard to abate sector? As we already mentioned, whatever they're thinking about, are they, you know, will it facilitate short-term emissions reduction? Is it for a short time frame? Just as how Sarah mentioned, it's a short time frame so that it eventually get replaced by, you know, more robust, greener technologies. So we ask these questions. We also need to see whether the company has overall transition plans it's actually a solid, science-based solid plan. But we also look at the quality of management. Quality of management means, what's the governance process like? What is their processes around data collection? How do they ensure that they are good quality, that they are validated, So we look at that. But even more importantly, we look at a mindset. We try to get a sense. It's very hard to determine outright, but we try to get a sense of the mindset and intentions of the company. Are they genuinely embracing the opportunities and seeing the risk, or is it a checkbox exercise? So these are some of the criteria. In terms of what the board can do, first of all, I just want to highlight, we all know this, but the board is really the fourth line of defenses after the first, second, and third within the management. So as a fourth line of defense, just as how Sarah mentioned, it's important you have diversity on the board. You need to have proper structure of board, whether it's the board and the committees in place, as well as do the boards have their own goals? The management can have their goals, but do the boards have their own goals of how they like to see the whole thing unfolding, in terms of transitioning? Do they ask for regular reporting from management? Do they have the right competency and command of the subject? Are they getting training or updates regularly enough? Are they engaging with the investors? Because this is such a huge subject, really. Unless you engage with the investors, sometimes you lose sight of what's really important and what's emerging out there. So that's at the level of the board. And the board need to work with management to really incorporate this whole agenda into the heart of the strategy, right? So that's very important. I think it's absolutely important to get the CEO and your sustainability team passionate. Get the right people who are passionate about this. Otherwise, you're working against, it's an uphill task. So make sure you have your CEO or your sustainability, and your sustainability team members who are really passionate about this. And making sure that this agenda is not just owned by the CEO or was yet only owned by the sustainability committee. We must have the businesses, business units all owning it. Their metrics, their compensation metrics must be linked to that of the business units. And not only short-term ones, because it can be just very yearly compensation packages. Make sure it's linked to a longer-term compensation package, which is what we have in CMB. The board has a responsibility to make sure that they have the right resource management, carve resources into this space, the tools, the people. Very importantly, absolutely importantly, is the culture. How does management incorporate this sustainability, embed it into every decision that they make throughout the company and link it to purpose? So question is, they ought to look at the company's purpose. You see, purpose is a fairly new conversation in Malaysia, right? So I think the starting point is maybe all boards should be looking at their purpose and say, does it make sense? What is the role of our company in the society, in our community? If our purpose doesn't sort of say that, then maybe it's time to refresh the purpose to get that, restated, and then link everything up together, link the individual staff and team members and senior management's purpose to that purpose, because then it becomes all very smooth, all going along the same path. And of course, I think I mentioned already, making sure that data is good quality. That's absolutely essential. You don't have good data, how do we report? How do we compare? So these are some of the thoughts.
No, I like the fact that you mentioned about the importance of having the right people and getting everybody on board, not just the board, but the management as well. So we've talked about structure, we've talked about people, resources, so forth. Maybe we moved on to the investor perspective, Regina, if I may. Generally, there's a growing perspective that rather than divesting from high emitting sectors, investor should also focus on helping these sectors transition to greener operations. Now, how do you think can investors actively engage with companies to better support their decarbonization journey? And in your opinion, you also sit on boards, what role should boards play to ensure that these partnerships lead to real, tangible, measurable progress?
Okay. Thanks, Jackie. I think the key thing here for institutional investors, there's a slew of organizations. You've got PRI, you've got Climate Action 100, you've got the Asian Investors Group as well, looking at these, right? So in terms of engagement, I think there's plenty of benchmarks that we can take. But definitely from the Malaysian perspective, we've got Institutional Investors Council, and our members have about 2.3 trillion ringgit in terms of assets under management. And what I've seen so far, having joined them since last year, is that apart from governance, sustainability has been incorporated within our code for institutional investors, whereby principles 7 and 5 talk about not just in terms of reporting, but in terms of also collaborating together in terms of working towards sustainable solutions. Because we recognize that it's work in progress, for one. And I think one of the key areas that we have also seen is that there is growing appreciation by boards when we do the company engagements with our investee companies, that there is growing appreciation. And I like the fact that most of the companies that we engage with will actually get their board members to attend these meetings. So, and that's to me, that's a big win first, because most of the time when it comes to meetings with investors, it's very hard to actually find board members actually attending, apart from the AGMs, right? So that's one big win. And then when we talk about sustainability, obviously it differs from company to company. And clearly Malaysian companies have a lot to learn and a lot more to do. But it is growing. There is, I think SC did a survey 2 years ago whereby about half of the companies are actually having some form of sustainability companies, whether it be at the board or at the management level. So that's one improvement that we've seen. I think, there's also a lot of legislations, right? So you've got the climate change bill that's coming up next year. That should also provide good legal frameworks. And then the carbon tax that's supposed to be coming in for the iron, steel, and energy sectors. And I think that's also going to help in terms of the R&D for decarbonization. So in terms of carbon pricing and all that, there's a lot of work to be done. But clearly, I'm very, very proud to say that our institutional investors here in Malaysia, particularly the government-linked ones, are very active in pushing the agenda. So we've heard earlier this morning from PNB on what PNB has done, where they've actually written letters to the investee companies saying that if you don't have a net zero target, basically you're going to be in trouble, right? So I think that's very, very key to change corporate behavior. Your institutional investors in particular, especially for Malaysia, where we hold such a big chunk of the market, that we need to push the agenda and say, behave in the way we want for a sustainable future as well as financial resilience. Otherwise, you get dropped, right? So that's the key thing here. And I think in regards to the boards, we'd like to see a lot better, understanding of the issues. But I'm glad that, the likes of Bursa and ICDM as well, you've got the, what do you call that, the mandatory accreditation program. So you've got the leadership for impact. So I think that's also key in actually increasing the knowledge base of most of the board directors anyway. Thanks.
Yes, Regina, if I may just follow up on that. I read that in France, the financial regulator, based on a survey of companies and investors, have sort of issued a guidance wanting company boards to demonstrate a deeper involvement in the implementation of company transition plans, right? And I think some of it, the guidance also provided that they needed to have detailed explanation, right, the companies, of any observed progress or deviation. So from your many conversations with Malaysian boards here, do you feel that that's currently where the boards are at, or so we sort of move towards that direction? Are we at that level where boards are able to kind of explain or have the relevant skills to define and deploy these transition plans?
I think, you've got selected companies that are obviously very far ahead. CIMB is obviously one of them. But I think generally we are still at the appreciation stage and trying to say that whether to embed sustainability conversations within the strategy and all that, it's still something that is coming. And I think we're at a tipping point, honestly, because you've got from next year onwards, you've got the Bursa listing requirements whereby you've got to have, TCFD compliance and all that. So I think in the next 2 years, we'll be seeing a lot of difference in terms of how boards actually tackle this issue. And then also now that you've got growing litigation on boards, not just on the climate issue, but also in terms of governance. So, you could sit on a board right now and 10 years later, someone's going to sue you for decisions that you make now. So I think if we can emphasize that, then I think perhaps the attitude of the individual board members will be very different, right? Because then it's a personal stake. And actually, it should be a personal stake because you've only got one planet Earth, right?
That's right. And I think when we conduct the mandatory accreditation program on sustainability, I think the boards are particularly paying a lot of attention when it comes to the segment on legal duties pertaining to climate change, as well as when we talk about litigation.
Yeah, but we also need to also worry about the ecosystem, right? Because your insurance policies in regards to board of directors in regards to climate change has not actually moved in tandem, right? So I think that's one of the key things that I personally am concerned about, because your personal liability is there, and yet most insurance companies will probably say, hey, it's force majeure, I'm not paying for this. We might, I don't know, maybe perhaps Sarah might have a better understanding of this, because what's happening with the Philippines with all these typhoons happening.
Yeah, Sarah, any views from the other?
I know more about how we can't insure coal-fired power stations than directors' insurance. And certainly being an AICD graduate and on Australian boards as well as on Asian boards, the concept of personal liability for board decisions is a long way behind. And I do agree that, if that becomes a greater focus, then board members will focus more on making the right decisions. But as an Australian and as somebody who is being subject to all of these risks in Australia, I will also say, be careful what you ask for. Because the other thing you come is if you give board members too much liability, they just leave. And then you get bad board members. So the good ones who are smart enough to realize that this is actually a risk, if they cannot manage it, if they do not feel they're on a board where everyone is pulling in the same direction, then the good board members will just leave. So making everything personal liability has downsides as well as upsides. And, we need to find that balance between ensuring that everyone does a good job and has a motivation to do a good job, and the sort of the downsides where, as I've seen in Australia, good directors are just leaving the profession because they just can't take the risks anymore.
So going on that subject, Sarah, on personal liability, Regina mentioned about rising climate litigation. So I'd like to bring you to the subject of greenwashing. Whilst we see that transition finance offers, tremendous opportunities, but I guess there's also a risk of greenwashing. How do boards, you feel, your board particularly, ensure that your activities are genuinely contributing to decarbonization, and they're not just superficial efforts? Maybe talk a little bit about what measures you've got in place to avoid this risk. I mean, there's terms of greenwashing, and then there are terms of greenwashing as well these days, right? Your views.
I think from the perspective of my Philippine board, I have to go back to what I said before. We have shareholders who have a very strong sense of purpose. They have set with the board the values for the company. And I think purpose gives you the guiding light. If you have a strong sense of purpose, if you build a corporate culture where the entire culture is aligned with the purpose and the values of the company, if you have that signed off right from the top, from the board, from the shareholder, then you don't necessarily need to worry so much about greenwashing, because people will do the right thing because the right thing is what the company does. And that's who they are, and that's how their company operates. If you have a company, and I'm on another company, which is also building renewables and is very strong in this space, I would say they do not have purpose. Their purpose is to make money. They see green infrastructure as primarily an opportunity to make money. But they employ staff who have joined this company because from an external perspective, it looks like it must be a fantastically green company because they're very effective. They're a very effective company at building, high quality, fast, green investments. And what you get then is a corporate culture where the top is just trying to make money and the staff are trying to do the right thing as well as make money. And then you get a clash of corporate culture. And then you definitely get a situation where there is a risk of doing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. And so for me, I think it really comes down to a corporate culture. If you don't have a corporate culture of how we do things is as important as what we do and how much money we make from it, then you get this risk. But when it is very clear that every single person is thinking about how they do their job, as well as what they do and why they do it, then we basically are all rowing our boat in the same direction. I'm not sure that's the answer you wanted, but it's the one that I see from my experience.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe Regina, you want to add on the boards that you're at as well?
Well, I think definitely, I think the boards that we've seen, it's a mixed bag, right? A lot of them are either totally based on what the main shareholder says. So the fact that we've got a lot of government-linked institutional funds being the major investor, that's good. So how I liken it would be the fact that if we look at the Japan example, Japan had a lot of corporate governance issues in the past, but they had managed to change the corporate culture by making the fact that the GPIF actually issued a standard, right? So in order for any companies to be invested by GPIF, there were some standards that needed to be adhered to in terms of governance standards. So we're seeing this similar things here in Malaysia, and I think at least this year you can see how MOF has taken a lead in terms of getting the government-linked institutional funds to be, working together a lot more closely. So I think in that sense, the ability for the institutional investors to then, funnel through to the board members through either their nominees as well as the investing companies which they have interest in to actually work in tandem with what they're requiring of their in terms of their investment decisions, right? So clearly there is no there is no what do you call that, the fact that we are wanting to work in that right direction, and there is a lot of push by the institutional investors. But again, it is dependent on the individual company and the chairman as well. So I think that drives a lot of the quality of the sustainability initiatives within a particular company, because sometimes you've got very strong chairmen that might not chairman or shareholders that might not see the benefit of having a sustainability agenda. And I think that's where a lot of Asian companies have issues, because you have family owned or individuals who have very strong personas. I think that's where the boards might have issues in terms of actually pushing the sustainability agenda. But you're looking at I was privileged to sit on a panel last week at the Client Earth guide for board members on climate change. And I think what was very worrying for me in terms of the report was the fact that you've got that increasing litigation risks for board members. So again, it goes back to the fact that how much personal liability should we take to sit on a board, even if it's for the good of society, right? So I think that's a balance that I can see me smiling there, going very, very, very concerned as a bank, in terms of how much risk can you take, and the information that we have right now as board members is only limited, right? A lot of that information might not be available for a few years, and definitely in Malaysia, I think that the quality of the data that we have is also left wanting. So I think that's one of the key areas that we really also need to focus on. How do we safeguard ourselves and safeguard the planet without everything going wrong, right?
That's right. Yudmi, I think you want to say something because you are on the board, but you're also a financier as well. So it's in your best interest to make sure everything is right. Yeah.
So sitting on the board of CIMB, to be honest, all these things that have been just discussed, it's absolutely worrying for us. So what do? We first of all, we have 3 lines of defense, right, within the management. So we ask make sure that the second line of defense, the compliance, all are involved. Very importantly, the third line of defense, the internal auditors get involved. We get the 5th line of defense, we call them then, external auditors, very much involved in the conversations. But more than that, we also tell the team, when in doubt, disclose. So don't try to hide it. When in doubt, disclose. So that is generally how we do it. But we also make sure that the teams report to the boards. So in CIMB, there are many, many boards. So to the holding board, it's quarterly reporting. As the chair of sustainability, group sustainability, I report back with scorecards. So it's not just, we did this, we did that. We actually have metrics, success metrics, performance metrics. We actually report back using those metrics, as well as we have twice a year reportings from by the group sustainability team to all the boards across the region, across the business units, then which allows the opportunity for the board members to really ask critical questions, and this is how I suppose we keep the management really on their toes also, to keep us updated. This is how we do it.
Yudmi, as a board of director, you now chair the board sustainability committee. What were your efforts in sort of upskilling yourself? Maybe share a little bit on that, directors. Would like to hear.
So I have always been in this space. I started when they even called it environment. You remember, those of us old enough, they started calling this space environment. So I've been in this space for a long, long time. I have some Cambridge programs behind me. So that was how I have it. But so that was my starting point. But more than that, it is about keeping up, because things are evolving so very quickly. I really suggest board members to really, keep a watch out. There are a whole lot of conferences just like this, where you can listen to experts speaking about, all this emerging topics. At our board, because it is so challenging, I actually have the sustainability team at every sustainability presentation they have a 15-minute, almost like a tip talk, TIPTO talk, telling us about a particular emerging topic. So this is how we try our level best to keep everyone up to date. But you know what? It has to be personal. You have to take that step to go and read up and be interested, be curious. As board members, if we are board members, we must be curious about this, because otherwise we can't say, I have no time to read that or understand these.
Thanks, Yudmi. Regina, if I come back to you on the investor's perspective is, as an institutional investor, how do you think they can leverage their influence to push for stronger climate policies and frameworks that support green transition? How can the boards play a role in facilitating such an engagement, or maybe even shape these conversations?
Like I mentioned before, I think the key thing for institutional investors in Malaysia anyway, the fact that there's a lot more collaboration between all the GLCs and all that, that's one way. The other way is that of course they've got the nominee board members on the major investee companies. That's another way. But I think the key thing here is also for us to question in terms of the skill matrix of the board members, because I think that's something that we've not gone to, so we're still at the IIC, whenever we have any company engagements, we're still talking about sustainability from a very helicopter view, right? 30,000 type of view, rather than going down to the granular, because what we're seeing is that we don't particularly see strong, not to say strong engagement, but maybe perhaps we're not seeing the board members coming out to say, like, in terms of what exactly is how they perceive the sustainability agenda is within that particular company. Because I still think that a lot of companies in Malaysia look at it from a box ticking exercise. It's like, okay, this is what Bursa wants us to report, this is what SC is saying, this is what Bank Negara is saying, we've done this. And this is why we're also seeing a lot of the sustainability reports being quite similar in nature from one company to another. So although no one has been accused of greenwashing properly here yet, I think that risk is actually going to be coming out. But in defense of boards, it's also the fact that, what I heard, that there's about 40,000 odd sustainability consultants that's available right now, right? So as a board member, when you ask your management or whoever in terms of actually trying to verify that information or whether or not you're on the right path, who do you go to? Because there's no body that verifies all these consultants, right? So that's also another risk that we take into consideration when we talk to our companies in terms of the engagements. But yeah, I leave it to Sarah to add on, but yeah, that's where we are at.
I'd just like to give you an example from outside of Asia, where actually finance institutions can cause more problems, even though they're trying to do the right thing. So I had a project with one of my companies where we were wanting to build fuel cells using hydrogen, generate electricity with no emissions at all. So they're fundamentally a good thing, but you need a lot of infrastructure to be built in order to get a hydrogen economy going. And building the fuel cells first is one way to generate demand, and enable all of the rest of the infrastructure to be built. And so one of the companies that I'm on the board of had a plan to build some fuel cells, and one of the institutional investors who sits on the board was very not wanting to take this investment purely because they would use a dirty fuel for the first 2 of its 20-year life, even though this is all part of a government infrastructure to build up an entirely net zero infrastructure, because that particular institutional investor had a policy of never investing anything that had even a single molecule of an emission, because they thought that this was the way to go. And so, one of my big asks, and I think we're going to come to some big asks, my big ask is for some joined up thinking, because we are all in the boat rowing together. We all are sinking in the boat together. And the only way we're going to get out of it is if we actually all row together, and that we recognize that we actually need joined up thinking, that we can't just devolve the decision. As a financier, I won't insure a coal-fired power station even though it might be the best coal-fired power station and it's going to shut early. I won't invest in a fuel cell that has 2 years of emissions, even though for the next 18 years of its life it'll have none, and it's part of building an infrastructure that will be net zero in total. Finance institutions have to think that they can't just have yes, no. They actually have to be part of a nuanced transition, where you have to see it as a pathway going forward. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Sarah. Regina, to your point about board skills matrices, I think Hong Kong is taking a step to try and mandate that a company have to disclose their board skills matrix. It's still in consultative phase, but I think that's a good step in ensuring that every company has the right mix. Although I'm quite cautious that sometimes in some boards there's over-reliant on one particular person who is very well-versed in sustainability or when they have a dedicated sustainability committee. So in some ways, at ICDM, we try to advocate that all board members have to equally upskill themselves so that they can make the right decisions. Just before we close, Yunmi, I want to ask you this because we're on a panel for transition finance. What do you see as the next wave of innovation in transition finance products? Are there any emerging tools or structures that are coming up?
Well, I'm sure in the near frontier, there are a whole lot of new innovative products. But I'd like to just speak a little bit about the one that we launched not very long ago, Green Biz Ready, for SMEs. So we talked about it. We said, yes, it's very important to have innovative products for, for all the various needs. But we also want to make sure that we are making it accessible to everyone that need it, right? So then we came up with Green Biz Ready for the SMEs. We have what I call the ESG simplified playbook for the SMEs. So what we do with this product is we actually give them complementary training. We actually give them capacity building programs. We help them with even setting up their pathways. We actually even have tools available for them. The tools is not CIMB proprietary, but there are tools out there which we then link them up to use so that they can easily track, at least initially, Scope 1, Scope 2, and eventually Scope 3. But this is what we have been doing, making sure that that SMEs, of course, our backbone of our economy, also have begin this journey on this. Because as just now, I think it was alluded to during our conversation that many of them actually want to also, but just don't know where to start, how to start. So this is what CIMB have done to at least, so we have little meetings and briefings where we invite our clients in and say, this is what we have, join us, and they're complementary.
Thank you. Thank you. We hope that CIMB will continue to come up with all these products to help not just SMEs but PLCs as well. So finally, I think we start closing. The final question would be, if you could make one big ask, I know, Sarah, you've mentioned that, you can have another ask, of corporates, governments, or regulators to accelerate the clean energy transition, what would that be? Maybe Regina, I start with you first.
My ask is very simple. I think we need to have a lot more engagement together and not just have it from, it shouldn't just be, banks talking to each other, investors talking to each other. It's got to be the whole stakeholder, right? Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a more holistic, collaborative approach to this, we're just going to make so many mistakes that could have been avoided in the first place. So collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, it's very similar to what Regina just said. I want some joined up thinking. We actually need, from the policies from the government, from the way regulators implement their regulations, from the way companies organize, from the way finances, it has to fit together. We can't have the regulator. So, for example, my coal-fired power station example, maybe we could build biomass, but we don't have permission to build biomass. That would actually require a whole bunch of extra, going through an extra bunch of regulations. So, you try and make good decisions, and then you come up against regulators or governments or practical issues that you just can't do it. So a bit more joined up thinking and a bit more collaboration. I think Regina said it very well.
Thank you. And Yudmi?
Yeah, if someone could show the last slide that I have.
Yes.
Really, what I have is exactly similar to what both Regina and Sarah have said. It is about, if you look at this boat, this is one boat, right? And equivalent to our one planet. The poorer countries are already now suffering. They're already underwater, as you can see from this picture. The rest of us are somewhere in the middle, and we are struggling right now. And then the richer countries up there says, the ship may be sinking, but for the bottom rung, maybe not for us. Now, but we're on this one planet. We need to work together. So first of all, it's a mindset thing. I think we start with mindset. We must realize that we're interconnected, we're interdependent, we need to work together. Therefore, we need to engage with everyone, to what Regina and Sarah have said about working together, putting the right things in order. That's the way to go.
If I was to take your boat example, I would say we need to stick some oars out, but then we actually all have to pull at the same time. Because a rowing boat does not go anywhere if everybody pulls their oars at different times. We just go round in circles.
That's right.
Actually need to set a course and then everyone pull the oar at the same time to move forward.
Thank you.
Regina, anything about the ship? Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I've got a lot to say about the ship, but basically I totally agree with the two ladies. I mean, this is a great visual. I think the key here to end the session would be to say that climate change is not about just money and all that, right? It's really about making sure that the next generation of humans are actually able to live in a habitable planet, right? So it might not be us right now, but whatever it is, we're going to have to make humans survive. So it's something that we cannot run away from.
I agree, thank you. So we're quite hopeful about COP29 and the 100 billion that hopefully will materialize. So if I may just a couple of points and sum up what we've discussed today. Regina, I really like your point about transition finance is a tool to drive change. I think Yumi mentioned on finance institutions like CIMB addressing sector-specific frameworks and helping companies with their transition. But I think when we talked about greenwashing, we talked about mitigating transition risk. One thing that came up very strongly was corporate culture, right? Doing the right thing and knowing what to do and having the right intent to transition. And of course, because we're addressing the audience, which may be boards as well, having the right governance structure to attract investors. So we spoke a little bit about having the right board skills matrix, dedicated committees, and the right people in the right place. So even chairman is very important to drive this. A little bit about risk on having your 3 lines of defense. When you're unsure, disclose. Yudmi mentioned about boards needing to continue to upskill so you can always ask the right questions. But I think collectively, we agree that collaboration and collective partnership is the way forward, and joined up thinking, a lot more engagement. I hope I've summed it up nicely. So thank you, ladies, for your participation. I noticed there are 4 ladies on this panel. Apologies for my visual. Hopefully, wishing Shen and CGM the best for all your upcoming conversations. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie, and our incredible panel of women for sharing your valuable insights today. And thank you all for joining today's session on systemic shift, capitalizing green finance and carbon market potential in Malaysia. As we conclude for today, we hope the sessions have fostered meaningful discussions and highlighted key opportunities to drive Malaysia's energy transition and strengthened climate resilience through innovative financing solutions. Before you go, please take a moment to scan the QR code for our feedback survey. Your input is greatly appreciated. As always, all our sessions are recorded and will be made available on our official CGM YouTube channel for anyone wishing to revisit these insights. The recordings will be time-tagged with blog posts to follow. And don't forget to watch the live stream for the Malaysia Pavilion at COP29 in Baku by visiting the official Malaysia Pavilion Facebook page or simply just by scanning the QR code on the screen. On behalf of our team, thank you so much to all speakers and participants for engaging in this crucial conversation. And let us continue tomorrow for Day 7, Empowered Community, Gardens of the Sustainability Ecosystem. Take care and see you tomorrow.